Eddard Stark had always believed that honor meant keeping one's word and doing right by the gods. Before he departed Winterfell for King's Landing, he had prayed in the Godwood, seeking guidance about the path that lay before him, never suspecting how drastically the winds of fate would change. Yet in that moment, beneath the ancient weirwood with its carved face weeping sap, no voice spoke to him of the future. No vision warned him of betrayal or destiny. His journey south had ended in ruin, yet perhaps not the ruin everyone believed. All of Westeros remembered the day Lord Eddard Stark was brought before the assembled crowds outside the Great September of Baelor. They remembered how he was forced to confess treason, how Joffrey Baratheon, perched on the Iron Throne like a cruel boy-king playing at war, demanded Ned's head. In one version of the tale, the blade fell. The North wept. Ned Stark, father to Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon, was lost forever. But in another version, this tale, events shifted as if the gods themselves had intervened or perhaps mortal hands had seized an opportunity to spare him. Rumors whispered that moments before the executioner's sword descended, a flurry of chaos erupted. A shape moved near the dais, and a bearded man with fiery eyes, some said a red priest, invoked the name of the Lord of Light. A flash of steel, the clang of metal, and by the time the city guard seized control of the spectacle once more, Lord Eddard Stark had vanished. It happened so quickly that the crowd could scarcely understand what had transpired. Some swore they had beheld a miracle. Others said it was but a cunning trick, or that Varys the Spider had orchestrated yet another of his hidden maneuvers. There were those who claimed that the brothers without banners had spirited Ned away through dark tunnels that snaked beneath the city. Only a handful of men knew the truth, and those men belonged to the mysterious outlaw band led by a lightning lord and a red priest. Ned's first conscious memory after that day was of waking in a dark cavern, the air thick with damp stone and the tang of burning torch resin. His head ached, and an old bandage was wound around the side of his neck. He realized with dawning horror and relief that he was alive, yet the question of how remained. As he tried to rise from his makeshift pallet of furs on the cold ground, a sudden wave of dizziness overcame him, forcing him back down. A moment later, a man approached, hooded and cautious, carrying a waterskin and a battered tin bowl of broth. He knelt and said, "Drink, Lord Stark. We've risked much, but I am Thurs of Myr. The Lord of Light blesses you with one more day." Ned blinked. Light from a torch shimmered behind Thurs, revealing a shadow of his bushy beard and slightly singed robes. He noticed the faint odor of old wine. More figures hovered in the cavern's gloom. Someone held a torch that revealed pale faces, concerned expressions, and patched cloaks. Still fogged by the lingering effects of a sleeping draught, Ned struggled to speak. Why would you risk your lives for me?" His voice came out rasping, raw from thirst and from the trauma of near-death. He recalled Joffrey's sneer as he gave the order. The memory set his heart racing with hatred and fear. A figure stepped forward. Lean, tall, and gaunt beneath a weathered cloak, he carried himself with a curious dignity. Though his face was partially hidden by the flickering shadows, Ned spotted the scar across his cheek and the eye patch that marked him as Beric Dondarrion. Lord Beric, once a knight commanded by Ned himself when the hand of the king had ordered Beric to pursue the mountain. But that had been before so much blood was shed, before Beric died and was born again in the flames of the Red God, or so the legend said. He spoke in a low, respectful tone. "In King Robert's name you once sent me forth to bring justice to the Riverlands. We became the Brotherhood without banners after that fiasco with the Lannisters, the Mountain, and the horrors they unleashed. We've done what we could to protect the small folk. And we've heard rumors, dark rumors, about the true shape of this war. We believed your life was not yet meant to end. We have reason to think the realm needs you still, and so we saved you." Ned felt weak, dizzy, but resolute in the face of so much new confusion. "If Joffrey and the Lannisters discover I'm still alive—" "They will, eventually," Beric said. "But we are used to living in the shadows. And if they do discover the truth, well, it'll be too late. You have friends yet in the north, I'd wager. You have sons who march to free you. We'd see you safely away if that is your desire, though we have precious few roads to offer." Thurs bowed his head in agreement while the others behind Beric, men and women alike, peered at Ned with a mixture of awe and curiosity. One was a slender youth carrying a bow, another a woman with fierce eyes and a scar snaking down her neck. A few whispered quietly among themselves. The whole group emanated a ragged unity and unspoken bond forged by shared trials. Ned tried to sit up straighter, sipping carefully from the waterskin Thurs offered. The water was lukewarm, but it slaked the worst of his thirst. He tasted salt, sweat, and a hint of metal, as if the skin had seen too many days in a dusty pack. "You speak of my sons. What of my daughters? What of Sansa and Arya?" His heart clenched painfully, dread uncoiling in his belly like a serpent. He recalled the fear in Sansa's face, the burning defiance in Arya's eyes. Beric's expression grew bleak. Your daughters remain in the Lannisters' clutches. The younger girl vanished in the chaos around your execution. Some say she fled or that the Hound stole her away. We only know that she was not present in the square when everything went mad. Hope flared in Ned, tinged with fear. Arya missing, but free hopefully. And Sansa? Sansa? He forced out. She remains betrothed to that boy king. He will use her as a pawn, no doubt, Beric said quietly. We do not have the strength to rescue her in King's Landing. Not yet. The city is thick with gold cloaks and Lannister men. There's talk of new alliances and betrayals every day. Even the Tyrells are rumored to have joined the Lannisters to secure power. Ned's mind reeled. So much he did not know, so many changes since his captivity. But what was done was done. Slowly, he closed his eyes, recalling the promises he had made to Robert Baratheon, recalling the quiet vow he had once murmured to Catelyn when he departed Winterfell, that he would do right by their children. I will not abandon my girls. Even if I can do nothing else, I must see them safe. We wish to help you, Thura said, placing a gentle hand on Ned's shoulder. But you must trust us. We know these lands as well as any. We hide in the caves beneath the riverlands, moving from place to place. With time, we might manage some plan for Sansa. For now, you must rest and regain your strength, my lord. And so Ned Stark, who had once been the hand of the king and warden of the north, found himself among outlaws. The wound at his neck, though shallow, took time to heal, and in those days he discovered the Brotherhood to be a curious family. They welcomed him cautiously. They told him tales of how they had survived betrayal, spoken with small folk ravaged by war, and how they battled roving brigands who pledged fealty to no cause but bloodshed. They told him how Beric had died multiple times. Throat cut, spear thrust through the chest, an arrow to the eye, and how each time Thurza's prayers to Lawler revived him. Ned listened in wonder, uncertain whether to trust such miracles. But seeing the living proof standing before him was difficult to deny. The days stretched into weeks. Though the Brotherhood roamed constantly, each time they moved from one hidden cave to another or crossed through thick pine forests and rolling hills, they protected Ned's identity. He wore a hood, never spoke in towns, and avoided any place the gold cloaks might lurk. Rumors of Ned Stark's death persisted across the Seven Kingdoms. None suspected the tall, hooded man who traveled with outlaws. Yet more than once, Ned feared a stray glance or a random soldier might see the shape of his face beneath the cowl. During this time, the men and women of the Brotherhood became known to him as more than outlaws. Beric, for all his burdens, carried a deep weariness in his single good eye, matched by a steadfast dedication to duty. Thurza, though sometimes half-drunk, was a man of surprising empathy who tended to the wounded and prayed for strength. He never stopped doubting. Angui, the archer, had deadly aim and a swaggering confidence, but also a soft side when he laughed with the children who occasionally crossed their path. The fierce woman known as Milena told stories around the campfire, weaving images of heartbreak and courage into mesmerizing accounts that even Ned was compelled to hear. Through it all, Ned helped where he could. At first, the Brotherhood insisted he rest, but he was never one to idle while others labored. He gathered firewood, offered advice in training sessions, and patched a ragged tunic or two when supplies were scant. Yet Ned's thoughts turned always to his children. He knew that somewhere in the north, Robb might be marching with a host of loyal bannermen, proclaiming himself king in the north perhaps, for news traveled in thin echoes. He clung to that hope, wondering if Robb could ever imagine his father still lived. If so, how that might change the tide of events. But the Brotherhood moved slowly and carefully, seeking no large battles, content to pick off Lannister scouts or free peasants from extortion. Ned's frustration simmered beneath the surface. He was grateful to them for saving his life, yet the weight of duty pressed upon him. Each time he spied a raven overhead, he wondered if it carried dark tidings that might further imperil his family. The day came when Beric quietly approached him during a lull in their travel. They camped by a shallow stream surrounded by mossy boulders. The moon was high, its silvery light casting shadows through the trees. Most of the men slept, though Thurza sat near the fire, softly chanting in High Valyrian. Beric stood by Ned as he rinsed his hands in the stream, the eye-patch knight's expression grave. "You've nearly recovered your strength," Beric said. "You're not a prisoner here, Lord Stark. If you wish to leave us to rejoin your son, I'd not stand in your way. I promise to see you safely away, but I won't pretend it's easy for you to ride north. There are Lannister patrols on every major road and the Freys hold the twins. The risk is great." Ned spoke quietly, grateful for Beric's honesty. "My family may think me dead. I would rejoin them if I can. But as you say, the risk is great. And there is also Sansa, my poor girl, still in King's Landing, hostage to that vicious boy. I want to believe there's a way to help her. Arya, wherever she might be, is resourceful, but Sansa is trapped." Beric's lips tightened, forming a thin line. "Our numbers are too few to storm a city. Even if we glean some plot or infiltration method, it would require cunning beyond measure. I've spent much of my life trying to act with honor," Ned said softly. "Honor sometimes demands action beyond personal safety. If your group is willing, I'd ride with you. Not to wage open war, but to do what we can for the realm." He paused, recalling the conversation that had started it all. The late King Robert had tasked him with unmasking secrets, discovering the truth behind Jon Arryn's death, and that had led to betrayal. "We could be the shield for the weak. Is that not what you claim to be doing? Protecting the small folk? Dealing justice?" "Yes," Beric said, the single word carrying the weight of many battles. "That is our cause, and we will not falter. You have the heart of a true lord, Ned Stark. And perhaps the gods have kept you alive for a reason." So began a new chapter in Ned's existence. A man supposedly executed, now living in the shadows, forced to see war from the vantage of the common folk as he rode with outlaws. As days bled into weeks, he witnessed the ravages left by the War of the Five Kings. Farms burned, corpses dangled from trees. The roads were crowded with refugees. Wolves prowled in greater numbers at night, feasting on battlefields. Through it all, Ned used the vantage of anonymity to enact small mercies. He gave what coin he had to a starving family. He helped bury the dead of a village torched by raiders. He prevented the Brotherhood from taking a donkey from a boy who needed it to carry his mother. If the Brotherhood minded his moral code, they did not say so openly. Instead, they seemed to trust him more, as if each kindness reinforced their belief in him as a leader, though Ned had no desire to usurp Beric's position. There came a time when they approached the outskirts of a small hamlet near the Blackwater Rush. The fields lay trampled, muddy from the passage of horses and knights. A small group of Lannister soldiers had taken up in the crumbling remains of an inn, turning it into a makeshift garrison from which they bullied the local villagers. Word reached the Brotherhood that these soldiers were terrorizing the peasants, demanding grain and livestock in the name of King Joffrey. In truth, they were looters and worse. Under Beric's guidance, the Brotherhood scouted the situation. Ned, dressed like a hooded commoner, crouched in the tall grass. He watched with cold anger as a farmer was dragged before the commander, who accused him of hiding gold. The farmer's child clung to his leg, weeping. Ned's hand tightened on the hilt of the sword they had given him. He felt a pang of guilt and shame remembering how, before all this, he might have believed that knights served honor. Now he saw the cruelty and corruption that war had unleashed. "We can't let them torment these people," Thuras whispered, eyes intense beneath his heavy brow. "But they're a dozen men, and we are only 7. Angui fingered his bowstring. "I can drop a few from here, but not before they might kill hostages." Ned studied the camp. "We need a distraction. If we set a fire, or if someone pretends to approach for parley, we might draw enough of them away for the rest to strike. But we must protect the small folk." They formed a plan. Beric would approach openly as if he were but a ragged traveler seeking refuge. While half the men advanced quietly through the surrounding fields to flank the inn, Ned and Thuras would circle to the east, where the inn stable stood partially collapsed. Under cover of darkness, they would slip in, free any prisoners, and wait for the signal to strike. It was a small plan, the kind of skirmish the Brotherhood had executed before. Yet for Ned, this was a test of everything he believed in, a chance to defend the helpless, reminding him of the oath he took as a knight once upon a time. Night fell in a hush of chirping insects. Torches lit the battered courtyard by the inn, where the Lannister soldiers drank and laughed, confident in their power. Beric approached from the road, leading a skinny nag. As soon as the sentry challenged him, Thuras motioned for Ned to hurry around to the eastern side. They slipped through the tall reeds, careful not to rustle them overly, though their hearts pounded. Ned's breath sounded loud in his own ears. He reminded himself to remain calm. He had once faced down the best knights in the realm with composure. Now he crept like a thief, saving small folk from rabble. The irony was not lost on him. Beric's voice drifted from the distance, pitched to carry. "Please, sirs, I have some coin. Might I lodge here for the night?" The voice of the Lannister commander responded with a scornful laugh. "Step closer, old man, let's see what you carry." Men moved, the glow of torches flickered, and in that moment Angui's bow thrummed. They heard the hiss of arrows. 2 shouts. Then the ring of steel. Thuras gripped Ned's shoulder. "Now." They slipped into the stable yard. A single guard stood there, half-drunk and startled by the sudden sound of fighting out front. Ned moved swiftly, sword in hand, sliding from the shadow of the stable door. The man turned just in time for Ned's pommel to crack across his temple, sending him down in a heap. The occupant of the stable yard, an old mare spooked by the noise, neighed and kicked the wooden wall. Thuras hastened to calm her while Ned rushed inside, scanning for prisoners. He found a cluster of terrified villagers, women, children, one old man, huddled behind overturned feed troughs. When Ned pulled back his hood, revealing his stern, bearded face and the streaks of gray at his temples, they recoiled in fear, thinking him another threat. Softly he spoke, "We're here to help you. We're the Brotherhood without banners." They recognized that name, or at least recognized they were not Lannisters. One woman clutched her child and peeked over the trough, wide-eyed. "They were going to burn our homes if we didn't give them gold," she whispered, tears glistening. Ned nodded, compassion flooding him. "Come this way, but stay low." He guided them to the far side of the stable, motioning Thuras to lead them out into the cover of darkness. Shouts and clashes of steel burst from the courtyard as the pitched fight erupted. The Lannisters, more numerous but caught off guard, scrambled to mount a defense. Beric's sword glinted in the torchlight as he crossed blades with the commander, who cursed and spat in fury. Angui loosed arrow after arrow from behind an overturned cart. The woman Milena darted in to hamstring one soldier, twisting away with lethal grace. The Lannister soldiers were forced into disarray, especially when they realized the villagers they threatened were escaping behind them. Ned rushed out, sword in hand, determined to protect the escape. A soldier turned at the sight of him and lunged forward with a spear. Ned sidestepped, parrying with a fluid motion he had learned during his youth in the Vale. The soldier stumbled and Ned whipped the flat of his blade against the man's unguarded head. Another soldier roared a challenge and came at him. Ned blocked the overhead slash and countered with a strike that drew blood from the man's arm. The soldier stumbled, cursing. Before he could recover, Thuras crashed into him from behind, hammering him with a warhammer once carried by a fallen knight. The soldier collapsed in the mud. Beric, still crossing blades with their commander, shouted, "Yield," but the commander snarled, "A pox on you. I serve the true king, Joffrey." He pressed Beric hard, forcing him back a step, but then Thuras joined the fray, the glimmer in his eyes lit by torchlight. With one swift slash, Beric disarmed the commander, sending his sword spinning away into the mud. The man fell to his knees, panting. "Do it, kill me," he spat. "I'll not yield to outlaws." The courtyard fell silent except for the groans of wounded soldiers, the crackling of torches, and the whimper of one half-dead man. Beric, sword resting against the commander's chest, glanced at Ned. Ned's eyes narrowed. He recalled how these men tormented innocents. His old sense of stark justice warred with the Brotherhood's vow to show mercy to those who yielded. But the man's sneer indicated he would never repent. Beric's own gaze hardened. "We are not butchers," Beric said quietly. "But neither can we allow men who prey on the weak to continue. We give you a chance to live, on one condition: leave these people be. Lay down your arms and forsake the Lannisters. If you cannot do that, then your fate is sealed." The commander spat again, hatred twisting his features. But he was surrounded, unarmed, and outnumbered. The remaining soldiers who were still alive threw down their weapons rather than face more death. The commander said nothing more, glowering in defeat. Beric nodded to Thuras, who announced, "We'll keep their armor, their swords, and their supplies. They can leave with their lives and the clothes on their back, if that is acceptable to you, my lord." He glanced at Ned. The Brotherhood had once answered to him, in a sense, during the early days of the war. Ned felt the gazes of the villagers upon him. He turned to them, saw their fear, their anger. Many had likely lost loved ones to these very soldiers. "Let them go," Ned said heavily. aware that mercy might bring future danger, but to kill them outright would weigh on his soul. "We're not the mountain's men. Go, and remember that you have been spared." Some of the villagers muttered disapproval, but they did not protest openly. The soldiers, stripped of gear, were driven away into the night. Beric and the others helped the villagers gather food that had been hoarded in the inn. Bandages were fetched for the wounded among the outlaws. Ned stooped to tend to the farmer's child, who had a bruise on her cheek. She looked at him with wide eyes, as if in awe that a man with such a grim bearing could be gentle. Ned offered a soft smile, recalling Arya at that age. The memory stabbed at his heart. The next morning, after the Brotherhood had shared bread and salted pork with the grateful villagers, they prepared to depart. The villagers pressed upon them tearful thanks, begging for them to stay, to protect them longer. But the Brotherhood lived as ghosts, always moving. Ned quietly told them, "Stay safe. Gather any you trust around you. We will do what we can to keep the Lannisters from returning to this region. If you must flee, do so with haste." He turned away, feeling the old guilt that he could not protect everyone. This was not Winterfell, where he had once sheltered his people beneath strong walls. This was a realm gone mad with war. Still, they had done some good. That had to be enough for now. Word of their deeds spread among the small folk. People spoke of a hooded man traveling with the Lightning Lord, a man said to fight with a Stark blade. Some wondered if it was Robb Stark himself, or some loyal bannerman of House Stark. Rumors drifted, but none truly believed that Ned Stark had risen from the dead. As far as the realm was concerned, Eddard Stark was gone, and only the living skeleton of him remained, moving through the Riverlands in secret. Winter was coming, though the cold lingered in the far north for now. Storm clouds gathered, and the nights stretched longer. Ned found himself praying to the old gods in quiet moments, kneeling by ancient oaks or weirwoods wherever they could be found. Thuras occasionally watched him, curious about Ned's faith. Once Thuras asked, "Do your gods answer you in the wind among the leaves?" Ned sighed. "They are silent, but I feel their presence in quiet ways. I do not know if that is enough anymore." Thuras nodded. "All gods are silent in their own manner. Even Lawler, though he grants me visions sometimes. Faith is a heavy burden to carry, and duty heavier still." In the passing weeks, Ned came to appreciate the precarious dance of survival that the Brotherhood performed. They had pockets of allies among local villages, informants who would warn them of approaching armies or bounty hunters. They roamed from one hidden campsite to another, rarely staying more than a few nights in any one location. And wherever they went, they continued to do what good they could, robbing cruel lords, ambushing tyrannical knights, distributing food to the hungry. Ned's presence lent them a quiet authority. Though only Beric and Thuras knew the truth of his identity, the rest suspected but did not dare to name it openly. The men saw how Ned's counsel guided them. He had a commander's heart, and the gravity of war weighed in his every decision. One evening, after a particularly tense skirmish with 3 mounted knights sworn to Tywin Lannister, Ned stood watch outside their temporary camp. The stars gleamed overhead, bright pinpricks in the black dome. An owl hooted in the distance. Shadows flickered by the firelight. Beric approached quietly, setting a hand on Ned's shoulder. "Tense night," Beric said softly. "But we've done some good." Ned looked at the one-eyed knight. "Aye. Yet we always move on. We never stand and fight a real battle. We strike in the dark, vanish like thieves. This is not the war I imagined when I rode south to help King Robert." Beric's gaze swept the silent trees. "We are outnumbered in every sense. The Lannisters have half the realm, or so it seems. The other half is torn between Stannis, Renly, though Renly's death was rumored, your son Robb, and the Ironborn. We are few, but we hold to our cause." Ned felt the press of destiny. "I would see justice done on those who wronged my family. I swore an oath to protect the children of the realm, to rule justly if I served his hand. And yet here I am, living as an outlaw." Beric's voice was kind. "We are who we must be, Lord Stark. The realm is broken. Perhaps our small deeds will keep it from shattering further." He turned away, leaving Ned to his silent watch, alone with the swirl of conflicting emotions. The weeks bled together. Slowly, the leaves turned gold and brown, swirling down from the trees in a herald of the coming autumn. The Brotherhood ranged widely, from the foothills near the Vale to the edges of the Red Fork of the Trident. Ned heard tidbits of news, Rumors of Robb Stark's victories in the west, the death of Renly Baratheon, the crowning of Balon Greyjoy in the Iron Islands, and the forging of alliances between the Lannisters and Tyrells. In these fleeting scraps of information, Ned tried to piece together the shape of the war, but it felt like trying to reconstruct a shattered mosaic with half the fragments missing. One day, a ragged traveler stumbled upon their hidden camp in a copse of willows. The traveler had managed to slip past the sentries by pure luck, half dead from thirst and exhaustion. The Brotherhood fed and watered him, and in gratitude he revealed what news he carried from King's Landing. His voice trembled as he recounted the spectacle of the Battle of the Blackwater, how King Stannis' fleet had been broken by wildfire and the cunning defense orchestrated by Tyrion Lannister. The traveler had fled the city in the aftermath, disgusted by the cruelty of the victors. Ned listened silently, heart-pounding. The Tyrells had joined the Lannisters indeed, ensuring Joffrey's hold on the throne. That meant Sansa remained firmly in their grasp. Thoros, overhearing, turned to Ned. The look they shared spoke volumes. Rescuing Sansa had become an even more daunting task, if not outright impossible. The traveler's news included mention of how Sansa Stark was humiliated by Queen Cersei, her every movement watched. The traveler claimed some in the city pitied the girl, though no one dared speak out. All Ned could do was clench his fists, anger boiling beneath his calm facade. For the first time, he wondered if the only hope for Sansa lay in the possibility that her new paramour or betrothed might tire of her. But Joffrey was cruel. Ned swallowed down the bitterness of his powerlessness. Amid all this, something else burned in Ned, an awareness that if he reached his son, if he could reveal his survival, perhaps the tides of war would shift. Robb Stark was a charismatic leader, but the North might rally even stronger if their rightful lord and father returned. Yet to do so would mean risking the Brotherhood's concealment, jeopardizing everything they had built to protect the smallfolk. What if the Lannisters discovered Ned Stark was alive and moving with outlaws in the Riverlands? They would scorch the land to find him. A turning point arrived on a crisp morning when the Brotherhood found a group of armed men terrorizing a cluster of river folk near an old mill. Expecting another typical rescue, they attacked, but these men were not Lannisters. Their tabards bore the sigil of the Bloody Mummers, a vicious Sellsword company also called the Brave Companions, known to be in the employ of Roose Bolton or Tywin Lannister, depending on which rumor one believed. The fight proved fiercer, more savage, as these Sellswords took perverse delight in cruelty. Ned locked blades with a wiry man who wore a necklace of ears. The clang of steel on steel rang in the crisp air. The man fought with frenzied speed, grinning horribly all the while. He managed to score a shallow cut on Ned's arm before Ned found an opening and drove his blade into the man's chest. Blood spurted across Ned's glove. The Sellsword's grin went slack in surprise, and he collapsed, choking on blood. When the dust settled, the Brotherhood stood victorious, though battered. 3 of their own lay dead, including Melaena, the fierce woman whose storytelling had once warmed their camp. Thoros knelt by her still form, tears tracking through the grime on his cheeks. Beric stood watch, cursing softly. Ned felt a deep sorrow twist in his chest. It had been a senseless skirmish, but it underscored how vile the land had become, how the war had unleashed men like the Bloody Mummers. The rescued river folk wept as they thanked the Brotherhood for saving them from a fate worse than death. That night, they buried their fallen. Thoros performed a quiet ceremony in the name of the Lord of Light, but Ned, standing apart, silently beseeched the old gods to guide Melaena's spirit. By the flickering torchlight, Beric approached Ned with an expression of weary resolve. "How many more of our people must die to keep this fight going?" he asked. "We can't abandon the small folk, but neither can we endure endless skirmishes. The Mummers, the Lannisters, they close in on us from all sides. Our caches of food run low." Ned stared at the fresh grave, feeling the ache of regret. "I wish I had an answer, Lord Beric. I do know that there must be hope somewhere. My son is called the King in the North if rumors be true. He's had victories, but the tide may yet turn against him, especially if the Boltons or Freys betray him." He glanced at Beric. "I still dream of uniting with him, of revealing I'm alive, forging an alliance. With the Brotherhood's help, we might do more good. But it is not my place to command you. I owe you my life." Beric's single eye gleamed in the torchlight. "We swore to protect the weak. You are no longer weak, Eddard Stark. You are a leader whether you want the title or not. If you decide to ride north to join your son, some among us will follow you. Not all, but enough. Thoros might remain behind or come. I cannot say. But you have a choice to make." A choice, indeed. That night, Ned couldn't sleep. He paced under the moon, hearing the wind rustle the tree branches, feeling the sting of the cut on his arm. Eventually, he sought out Thoros, who sat near the embers of the dying fire, sipping from a wineskin. The Red Priest looked up, tired but willing to listen. "What troubles you, my friend?" Thuras asked in a low voice. "You know what," Ned said, leaning against a tree. "Honor demands I fight for my home, to protect my children, to help my son. But there is a sense of duty here too. A sense that these small folk need us. And then there's Sansa still in King's Landing. If I return to open war, how would that help her?" Thuras sighed, swirling the wine. "There are no easy answers. Lawler shows me glimpses sometimes. I've seen the Stark sigil, a gray dire wolf on a field of white, stained with blood in my flames. I've seen the Red keep in shadows as if haunted by ghosts. I do not fully understand the visions." He paused, then added, "But I sense your survival matters, Ned Stark. You are not done here." Ned let that sink in, turning away to peer at the sky. "I'm not a Red Priest, but if the gods truly have a design, I wish they'd make it clearer." The next dawn came, pale and chilly. Ned woke to find the camp astir, men muttering about better roads north. Beric had spoken to a few of them, evidently considering the possibility that they might attempt to cross the Twins or find a secret route around them. Word of Robb's encampment near Riverrun had reached them. Perhaps if they could reach Riverrun unseen, Ned could reveal himself to the Tullis and command a safe audience with his son. But the risk was enormous. Roose Bolton's men might be in the area, or Lannister outriders. And if the Freys discovered Ned Stark was alive, who knew what Walder Frey might demand as the price of crossing his bridge? Despite the dangers, a subtle excitement rippled through the Brotherhood. Many of them admired Ned Stark as the last bastion of honorable leadership from the days when Robert's rebellion had ended. If Beric supported Ned's quest, half the Brotherhood would be willing to ride with him, the rest scattering to continue the outlaw mission. By midday, the choice was made. Beric, Angui, Thuras, and about a dozen others would travel north with Ned, taking hidden paths, forging alliances with local folk, avoiding the main roads. Any who wished to remain behind to protect local villages might do so and wait for word. The parted groups would still call themselves the Brotherhood, united by purpose, if not by location. They set out under a gray sky. Their first obstacle came when they reached a crossing at the Red Fork. The river surged from recent rains and the small ferry had been destroyed by raiders. They spent a tense day building a makeshift raft, collecting driftwood and rope. Ned, Beric, and a few others worked with numb fingers to lash the raft together, uncertain if it would hold. By dusk, they managed to ferry themselves across in pairs, the current tugging ominously. Twice they nearly lost the raft, once when a swirl of water caught them, spinning them downstream. But by a stroke of luck, or Lawler's favor, they emerged on the opposite bank soaked and shivering, but alive. Pressing on, they avoided the main roads, traveling by game trails and half-forgotten footpaths. The nights grew colder. They huddled around small, concealed fires, cooking scant rations. Sometimes they found ephemeral aid from villagers who offered bread or salted fish, though these were often the same folk the Brotherhood had helped before. All the while, Ned was haunted by fear of discovery. Each rustle in the bushes could be a scout. Each overhead raven might be a spy's messenger. But stealth and caution guided them well enough. The day came when they stood on a hill overlooking the broad sweep of the Trident, the imposing bulk of Riverrun in the distance. Ned felt his throat tighten at the sight. He remembered the fortress from his younger days, from the time he first met Catelyn Tully and the times he had come as an ally to Hoster Tully. Riverrun stood resolute, a testament to Tully resilience. Banners of the dire wolf and the Tully fish flew from the battlements. The encampment sprawled beyond the walls, hundreds of tents, a sea of activity. Robb's army. Ned's heart pounded at the thought of seeing his son again, the boy who might now be a man grown in war, called king in the north. But how to approach without causing an uproar or risking archers? The Brotherhood had to be careful. Too many might assume them enemies, especially after so many months of chaos. Beric devised a plan. A few men would ride forward with a white flag at dusk, requesting an audience with Robb Stark on behalf of the Brotherhood without banners. They would say they carried vital information about the war. Once inside, they would arrange a private meeting. That was the hope, anyway. When dusk approached, Beric and Thuras donned half-decent cloaks, affixed a plain white cloth to a pole, and, with Ned hooded beside them, they rode down the slope toward the outlying sentries. Tension crackled in the air as they neared the pickets. Northern soldiers in cloaks trimmed with fur, emblazoned with the Stark direwolf, challenged them. Spears bristled. Beric raised the white banner, calling, "We come to speak with the king in the north. We have no quarrel with you." The soldiers eyed them warily. One recognized Beric's eye patch and the lightning sigil on his worn surcoat. "Outlaws," he spat, but then his gaze shifted, noticing the hooded figure. "Is that the Red Priest with you? We've heard tales." his hostility warred with curiosity. Wait here. We'll bring word to our lord. Minutes stretched into an agonizing wait. Ned's breath quickened. So close now. Men whispered around him. Finally, the soldier returned with a small entourage. You can come into the camp, but keep your weapons sheathed. Any trouble and you'll be filled with arrows. They obliged. The gate to the fortified camp opened, revealing row upon row of tents. Campfires glowed in the dim evening. War-weary men moved among them. Some stared openly at the newcomers. They were led to a large command pavilion near Riverrun's moat. Ned's heart hammered so fiercely he feared the guards could hear it. They dismounted, leading their horses behind them, heads bowed to avoid suspicion. A tall figure emerged from the pavilion, a youth with auburn hair wearing a mail shirt under a thick cloak. Behind him stood Grey Wind, the massive dire wolf, silent as death. Others followed, the great John Umber, the Blackfish Brynden Tully, a few other northern lords whose faces Ned recognized. The youth was Robb Stark, his son, though changed. He carried himself with a king's bearing, war's experience etched into his features. Grey Wind padded at his side, nose twitching at the strangers. Beric inclined his head. King in the north, we bring word. In that instant, Grey Wind let out a low growl, ears perked, sniffing the air around Ned. The direwolf's hackles rose, but he did not lunge. He seemed perplexed by Ned's scent. Robb glanced sharply at the hooded figure his direwolf fixated upon. Confusion furrowed Robb's brow. Ned's breath caught. He reached up and slowly pulled back his hood, revealing his face. A gasp rippled through those present. The Blackfish's eyes widened. The Grachan's mouth fell open. Robb stared, disbelief warring with hope and shock. Father. Robb's voice was a tremor. This cannot be. Ned's voice nearly failed him. It can, Robb. I live. Thanks to the Brotherhood. Forgive me for all the sorrow you must have endured. But I am here. Tears burned behind his eyes. A father and son, separated by betrayal and tragedy, now reunited in the flickering light of torches. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Robb surged forward, pulling Ned into an embrace. Grey Wind sniffed at them both, letting out a plaintive whine as if understanding something miraculous had happened. Sentries gawked. Lords murmured in astonishment. Some knelt, uncertain what they beheld. Was this truly Eddard Stark, returned from the grave? Robb held him at arm's length, tears brimming. How? They told me you were executed. My mother wept for you. We all did. Ned swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. I was saved at the last moment by Beric Dondarrion and his Brotherhood. They took me from the city in secret. It is a long story, and I'll share it in due time. For now, please tell me of the north of our family. Stunned, Robb glanced over his shoulder at the great John and the Blackfish, silently seeking confirmation that this was not some glamour or trick. The Blackfish, gray-haired and grim, stepped forward, his mouth set in a tight line. After a moment's study, he nodded. It's him. By the gods, Ned Stark stands before us. The Grey John roared a guttural exclamation that might have been joy. Others pressed closer, exclaiming in disbelief, peppering Ned with a dozen questions. Beric, Thuras, and their men hung back, allowing the Starks this moment. Robb beckoned them into the pavilion, commanding the guards to bring wine and food. The camp was ablaze with speculation. Inside, beneath the canvas, Ned sat with Robb, the Blackfish, and a handful of trusted lords. He recounted the truncated version of his survival, how the Brotherhood had intervened, how they nursed him back to health, and how he traveled in secrecy. Robb listened, eyes fierce, fists clenched at certain parts, such as when Ned described Joffrey's cruelty. Then Ned listened in turn as Robb explained the state of the war, how he had won battles at the Whispering Wood and the Battle of the Camps, how he had captured Jaime Lannister but lost ground to Tywin's tactics. The betrayal of the Freys loomed as a threat. Edmure Tully's bravery had held Riverrun, but the war was balanced on a knife's edge. And your sisters? Ned asked quietly, voice hoarse. The Brotherhood told me Arya escaped after my execution, but I know not her fate. And Sansa is still a prisoner. Robb looked pained. We've had no word of Arya. Sansa is indeed in King's Landing, betrothed to Joffrey at one time, though now I hear rumor of a different arrangement. There are whispers she might be forced to wed Tyrion Lannister. I cannot say for certain. Catelyn has prayed to the Seven and to the old gods for your souls, for Arya's safe return, for Sansa's freedom. But we have found no path to rescue her. He paused, voice trembling. I thought to trade Jaime Lannister for my sisters, but we never could strike a bargain. Mother even tried once in desperation. A hush fell. Ned clenched his jaw, recalling the vow he made to free his daughters. If Jaime Lannister remains your captive, we might still attempt to trade. Robb looked uncertain. It's complicated. There's the matter of the Karstarks, and, well, Lord Rickard Karstark demanded Jaime's head for the death of his sons. He turned against me when I would not yield to that demand. There was bloodshed in our camp. Jaime slipped away at one point with help, or so we suspect, but we recaptured him. The tension is high. I have to hold the loyalty of my bannermen. Karstark threatened to abandon us entirely if Jaime was not punished. And we need every man to stand against the Lannisters. Ned's stomach churned. So we must choose between vengeance or the chance of rescuing Sansa. A grim choice indeed. Beric cleared his throat. If I may speak, King Robb, I have fought Lannisters and their ilk for months now, but I know the city from my time there. A trade might be arranged in secret if the right leverage is applied. Or there might be another route of rescuing your sister by stealth. I can't promise a miracle, but the Brotherhood can infiltrate deeper than an army can. If you will it, we can try. We believe in Lord Stark's cause. Robb studied Beric, then Thoros, then Ned. After a moment he said, "You are welcome here, Lord Beric. The North does not forget old loyalties. But I must consider the counsel of my bannermen. We have immediate concerns, my men are weary, we are short on supplies, and Tywin Lannister marches even now." That night, Ned found himself alone with Robb. The brazier flickered in the corner of the pavilion, casting shadows on the canvas. Father and son faced each other, the gap of months and tragedies bridging between them. Ned saw the pain etched in Robb's face, the burden of leadership thrust upon him too soon. Robb spoke first. "Father, I called the banners when they told me you were taken. Then when they said you were killed, I was crowned king in the north by the lords. I never wanted it. But they demanded a king to lead them. I had to be strong for them. And for my mother, for Bran and Rickon, and for our people. Now you are here, alive. Does that mean I am no longer king?" Ned's heart ached with pride and sorrow. "You were chosen by our bannermen because they believed in you. I did not seek to usurp your crown, Robb. But you are still my son, and I will advise you as best I can. Let the North call you king if they wish. I only want peace and the safety of our family. I have no ambition to rule as king." Robb looked relieved, tears gleaming in his eyes. "I would rather share the burden with you. This war has hardened me, father. I ordered men to their deaths. I made alliances, broke them. Sometimes I fear I've lost my way. But seeing you now, I feel like there's hope again." They embraced, tears unspoken. In that moment, Ned vowed that he would do whatever it took to guide Robb and end this bloody conflict. He would reclaim Sansa, find Arya, restore the North to security if fate allowed. The Brotherhood without banners stood by him, and now, with an army behind him, perhaps the realm could change for the better. Yet war is rarely so simple. The lords of the North were overjoyed to see Ned alive, but some were wary about how this affected Robb's kingship. Others, like Rickard Karstark, were not pleased. They had sworn fealty to Robb as the king in the North, not to a resurrected Eddard Stark, who they suspected might show mercy to Jaime Lannister. Discord simmered just beneath the surface, even as Ned tried to counsel calm. If they could arrange a prisoner exchange, Sansa might be saved. But if Karstark and others deserted, the North's chances of victory would crumble. Amidst these political whirlwinds, Ned reconnected with Catelyn, who was inside Riverrun tending to her ailing father, Lord Hoster Tully. The reunion was fraught with emotion. She had believed him dead, the sight of him standing before her nearly caused her knees to buckle. They wept in each other's arms, relief mingling with the heartbreak of all they had endured. She peppered him with questions, which he answered as honestly as he could, though he spared her the grimmest details of his captivity. Together, they sat by Lord Hoster's bedside, and though the dying man's mind wandered, he recognized Ned briefly. The old lord smiled faintly, tears in his eyes, muttering something about the wedding that had bound Ned to Catelyn so many years ago. It gave Ned a bittersweet sense of closure. But the respite was brief. Word came that Tywin Lannister was on the move, uniting his forces and forging alliances with the Freys, who were ever eager to twist circumstances for their advantage. The Ironborn, under Balon Greyjoy and his daughter Asha, raided the northern coast, drawing away some of the northern bannermen. Roose Bolton lingered in the background, an uneasy ally. Betrayals, real or potential, waited around every corner. Ned spent hours in councils of war, sometimes accompanied by Beric and Thoros, who offered their knowledge of the terrain. Robb listened closely, though tension with Karstark remained. There was talk of a wedding alliance with the Freys, rumors about Edmure Tully's impending marriage. Ned found it all a tangled mess. Yet somehow they moved forward. In the following weeks, Ned played a pivotal role in planning the defenses around Riverrun. He urged Robb to try once more for a negotiated exchange of prisoners. Jaime Lannister was brought forth under heavy guard. Even after months of captivity, Jaime remained defiant, a half-smile on his handsome face. He seemed genuinely stunned to see Ned alive. Well, he quipped. It appears you're harder to kill than rumored. I trust the Lady Caitlin is pleased? Perhaps we might move on from all this nonsense and arrange a swap? My dear sister is quite fond of your Sansa from what I hear. Ned's rage flared, but he kept his composure. You'll be treated as a prisoner of war, Sir Jaime, until we finalize terms. If King Joffrey refuses to return my daughter, I see no need to spare you. Jaime shrugged with mocking indifference, but Ned saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. The Kingslayer was many things, but he was no fool. A short time later, ravens flew from Riverrun, bearing letters demanding Sansa's safe release in exchange for Jaime Lannister. Ned also included a plea for information about Arya, hoping that the Lannisters might reveal something. While they waited for a response, Ned sparred with the men, offering guidance, forging relationships. He rode out with Beric and the Brotherhood scouts, skirmishing with small Lannister detachments, thwarting raiders, and freeing villages. As the weeks passed, Ned's presence became a rallying symbol for the Northmen, a testament that the Starks, who embodied honor, still stood. Men whispered that the old wolf had returned from the grave. Morale soared, though the strategic situation remained precarious. At last, a raven arrived from King's Landing. The royal seal of King Joffrey Baratheon glistened on the parchment. The letter was a mix of threats and grudging acknowledgement. It demanded Jaime's immediate release, promised consideration for Sansa's freedom, and made no mention of Arya. The tone was dripping with arrogance, as if Joffrey believed that Ned Stark would grovel for the life of his daughter. Fury coursed through Ned, but he forced himself to remain calm. He recognized Cersei's hand in the manipulative language. There was no straightforward acceptance of an exchange. Instead, the letter was a labyrinth of conditions and demands. One line read, "If the traitor Eddard Stark is truly alive, let him come to the capital in peace to pay homage to his rightful king. Then we shall see about this supposed prisoner exchange." A heated debate erupted among the northern lords. Some demanded Jaime's head. Others urged caution, believing a negotiation might still be possible. Karstark raged, recalling the death of his sons at Jaime's hands. Robb struggled to keep order. Ned advocated for a stern response, offering a direct exchange of Jaime for Sansa with an immediate guarantee of safe passage. But neither side trusted the other. Tensions threatened to tear the Northern Alliance apart from within. In the midst of this turmoil, Thoros approached Ned privately, bearing an unexpected proposal. "There may be a third path," the Red Priest said gravely. "We attempt to rescue Sansa ourselves in secret. The city is large, full of labyrinthine passages. The gold cloaks can be bribed. I still have contacts in the Street of Steel, some smugglers who might be loyal to the memory of King Robert. If we succeed, Sansa is freed, Jaime remains in our hands, and the Lannisters lose their leverage." "It's madness," Ned replied, though hope flickered in his eyes. "You think we can sneak into the capital, abduct my daughter from the Red Keep, and spirit her away without half the city raising the alarm?" Thoros shrugged, a wry smile on his lips. "Madness, yes. But I have seen the Lord of Light do greater wonders. We would not go alone. Beric would come. A small band, skillful, disguised. Perhaps your son can stage a feint or send the rumor that we plan to trade Jaime at a location south of the city, diverting the Lannister forces. In the confusion, we slip in and out." Ned considered it, torn by longing to save Sansa. Robb would never risk an entire army for such a ruse. But a smaller maneuver? Possibly. We must speak with him. So the seeds of an audacious plan were sown. Days later, after more war councils and no forthcoming compromise from King's Landing, Ned, Robb, Beric, and Thoros hammered out the details. Robb's forces would make a show of marching south as if to deliver Jaime Lannister for an exchange near the ruins of a certain holdfast. Meanwhile, a small infiltration team, Ned, Beric, Thoros, Angui, and a few chosen men, would hurry ahead, traveling lightly to the capital, disguised as merchants or travelers. They would attempt the impossible, to break Sansa free from the Red Keep. If they succeeded, they would rendezvous with the northern host before the Lannisters realized the ruse. If they failed, well, Ned preferred not to dwell on that. But the war had reached a stalemate that only bold action might break. The parting from Robb was bittersweet. "If you do not return, father," Robb said quietly. Ned clasped his son's arm. "I will return. We will see our family safe. In the meantime, hold fast. Keep the men together. If we fail, the Lannisters may see it as reason to crush us, but you must remain strong. The North depends on you." Robb's eyes shone with pride and worry. "Go, then. May the gods old and new guide your hand." Thus, under the guise of traveling tradesmen, Ned Stark and a handful of loyal companions departed Riverrun, leaving the main northern force to feint southwards. They carried false documentation, wore simple garb, and parted ways in small groups to avoid suspicion. Beric, Thuras, and Ned traveled together while Angui and the rest followed at a distance. As they drew closer to King's Landing, Ned could not help but recall the last time he had approached that city, believing he was going to serve as Hand of the King for his friend Robert Baratheon. Now he returned a fugitive, presumed dead, risking everything to save his daughter. His heart pounded each time they passed a Lannister patrol or paid a bribe at a toll station. But the plan held. The Red Priest's cunning, Beric's knowledge of hidden passages, and the gold they carried helped smooth their way. Upon arriving at the outskirts of King's Landing, they took lodgings in Flea Bottom, a warren of ramshackle buildings, filthy alleys, and the city's poorest inhabitants. Many within Flea Bottom remembered Thuras of Myr as a frequent carouser in better days. Some recognized Beric's face from the tournaments of old. But coin loosened tongues and tightened loyalties. At night, they met with smugglers who knew the secret ways along the Blackwater Rush, the hidden gates, and the old tunnels beneath the Red Keep. Each day, Ned prayed to the old gods, though not in a godwood. The city's only weirwood was hidden deep if it existed at all. But in his cramped room he knelt, imagining the old heart tree in Winterfell, longing for his home, for Sansa's safety, for all his children. Meanwhile, Thuras prepared by burning small bits of parchment in a bowl, chanting in his foreign tongue, seeking glimpses in the flames. He claimed to see a glimmer of hope, though darkness threatened them at every turn. Beric sharpened his sword and tested his battered shield. They recruited a few locals who hated the Lannisters, promising them coin in exchange for help navigating the labyrinth of tunnels. At last, on a moonless night, they made their move. A small boat carried them around to a hidden watergate near the base of the Red Keep, used once for discreet trysts or for the supply of casks. Thuras claimed to have used it in King Robert's reign. Now it was watched by a pair of sleepy guards. Ned's heart pounded as they slipped from the boat onto the narrow stone ledge. Beric crept forward, dispatching one guard with a silent dagger thrust, while Ned dealt with the other guard, pressing steel to the man's throat and commanding his silence. By the faint lantern light, Ned saw the terror in the guard's eyes. "Run," he whispered, "if you want to live." The guard needed no second bidding. They entered the subterranean passages, guided by flickering torches. Their local allies led them through twisting corridors, up winding staircases, through half-forgotten storerooms. At one point, they nearly walked into a patrol of gold cloaks, their conversation echoing. The group froze, hearts hammering, until the patrol passed. Then onward they crept. Ned felt his palms sweat beneath his gloves. Every step brought him closer to Sansa, but also closer to discovery. If they were caught, the Lannisters would parade him through the streets again. This time, there would be no miraculous rescue. At last, they reached a side hall near the royal apartments. Thuras believed Sansa might be confined there. They faced locked doors and more guards. Time was short, dawn would break soon. With careful timing, Beric and Ned assaulted the guards. Blades flashed, muffled cries rang out. They dragged the bodies aside, praying no one would find them too soon. Angui, lurking behind a column, kept an arrow nocked, ready to cut down any who stumbled upon them. Ned and Thuras slipped inside. The corridor was dimly lit by a few candles. They searched the doors, each locked or barred. At the third door, Ned heard a soft voice from within. Heart-pounding, he tried the latch. Locked. Thuras produced a set of slim tools. With surprising deftness, he worked at the lock. Moments later, it clicked. Ned eased the door open. Inside, a figure in a plain gown spun around, startled. Sansa. Her hair was pinned in a modest style, her face pale with fear. She stifled a scream, recognizing the strange men in the darkness. Ned pulled back his hood, revealing himself. Her eyes went wide, then tears welled. "Father," she whispered, voice shaking. I must be dreaming. They said you were dead." Ned rushed to her, gathering her trembling form into his arms. "Hush, sweetling. We haven't much time." He could feel her heart racing, her entire body quivering. "We're here to take you home." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. She nodded, too shocked to speak. Quietly, Ned ushered her into the corridor. Thuras led them back the way they came, but as fate would have it, an alarm was raised elsewhere in the keep. Perhaps someone discovered the dead guards, or perhaps a random patrol had come upon evidence of intrusion. Shouts echoed through the halls. Heavy footsteps approached. Angui motioned frantically for them to hurry. They sprinted down the corridor, half carrying Sansa, whose slippers slipped on the polished floor. A squad of gold cloaks appeared at the far end of the hall, torches bobbing. One guard spotted them, shouting, "Intruders! Stop them!" Angui's arrow took that man in the throat. Another arrow felled the second. But more poured in. Beric led the charge, sword blazing in the torchlight, while Thuras bellowed, "For the Lord of Light!" Ned shielded Sansa behind him, warding off a spear thrust. The clash of steel rang in the narrow space. Blood sprayed the walls as Angui shot arrow after arrow. Ned felt a surge of adrenaline unlike any he'd known, slashing at guards who tried to close with them. But more reinforcements came from a side passage. They were pinned. Beric reeled from a sword cut. Thuras hammered at a guard's helm with a cudgel. Angui backed away, quiver nearly empty. Sansa clutched Ned's cloak, terror etched on her face. Just when they seemed doomed, a side door burst open, revealing one of their local allies who had scouted a hidden route. He waved frantically for them to follow. They broke away from the melee, retreating down a narrow flight of steps. The gold cloaks shouted and gave chase, but the group used every trick and secret turn they knew. Twice, Ned glimpsed a swirl of Lannister crimson cloaks among the halls, but they managed to vanish into the shadows. At length, battered and breathless, they emerged through the old storeroom, reaching the Watergate once more. They tumbled onto the small boat, pushing off into the dark waters of the Blackwater. Torches glimmered above, soldiers pointing and shouting. A crossbow bolt zipped past Ned's ear. Another struck the boat's side, splintering wood. But the river's current carried them away, out of range. Sansa huddled against Ned, sobbing in relief and fear. Thuras rowed with frantic strokes, while Beric clutched a bleeding shoulder wound. Angui kept an arrow ready in case of pursuit by boat. Thankfully, none came. When dawn broke, they were well downstream, hidden among reedy banks, exhausted but alive. Sansa clung to Ned, tears drying on her cheeks. She gazed at him with a mix of wonder, disbelief, and overwhelming relief. "You came for me," she whispered. Ned brushed back a strand of her auburn hair. "I would cross any distance to keep you safe." In that moment, all the hardship and horror they had endured seemed worth it. They had rescued Sansa from the Red Keep, slipping through the Lannisters' grasp. The war still raged, Tywin Lannister remained a threat, and the realm was no closer to peace. But for Ned Stark, accompanied by the Brotherhood without banners, there was a sense of triumph, an ember of hope in the gathering darkness. He clasped Sansa's hand, guiding her gently as they made their way across the muddy banks to rejoin the others. In the distance, the city's walls loomed, but they were free of that cage. Beric, leaning on Thuras, offered a weary grin. "One victory at a time, Lord Stark," he said. "One victory at a time." Ned nodded, gazing at the trembling figure of his daughter. Yes, this was only the beginning. They would return to Robb, attempt to unify the North, and see justice done. Eddard Stark had once believed in simple honor. Now he walked a path of shadows, forging alliances with outlaws, risking everything in dangerous gambits. But he would do it all again to protect those he loved and perhaps one day restore peace to a realm drowning in blood. They trudged along the muddy bank, the sky brightening with pink and gold hues over the horizon. None could say what the morrow might bring. But for the first time since his imprisonment in King's Landing, Ned Stark felt a surge of true hope. Hope that the North would endure, that his children would survive, that the Lannisters' tyranny might yet be broken by the resilience of those who refused to surrender. And if ever his faith wavered, he needed only to look upon Sansa's tear-streaked but determined face, the battered but unbowed forms of Beric and Thuras, and recall the countless common folk they had saved along the way. Together, they were proving that sometimes even the smallest light could stand against the darkness, and sometimes honor and mercy could triumph even in the midst of war. They trudged along the muddy banks of the Blackwater, their breaths still ragged from the frantic escape, and the eastern sky was stained pink and gold with the promise of dawn. Ned kept his arm around Sansa, though each step brought a bolt of pain to his back and shoulders, and the cold river water had seeped through his boots hours ago. Yet no discomfort could outweigh the overwhelming relief that his daughter was alive and free at his side. Beric walked just ahead, leaning on Thuras's shoulder as they made their way through reeds and tide-wet sand. Angui lingered behind with an arrow nocked, vigilant against any sign of pursuit. Despite the tension, a sense of triumph crackled in the air. They had done the impossible. They had broken into the Red Keep and snatched Sansa Stark from the Lannisters' grasp. And if luck remained with them, they would vanish before the sun rose high enough to reveal them to any watchful eyes on the city walls. Sansa was trembling, and Ned could feel her stiffen at every sudden noise. The rush of water, the low call of a distant gull, the crackle of reeds beneath their feet. He tried to soothe her, murmuring words of reassurance. She clutched the tattered cloak he had thrown around her in the night, tears long dried upon her cheeks. Over the past months, she had lived under the Lannisters' thumb, forced to endure Joffrey's cruelty, Cersei's manipulations, the constant threat of violence. To her, this sudden rescue must feel like waking into a dream, the world no longer predictable even in its torments. He squeezed her shoulder gently, guiding her to a drier patch of ground where they could rest. Beric sank to his knees near the shelter of a leaning willow, pressing a hand against the blood-stained gash on his arm. Thuras dropped beside him, rummaging in his satchel for bandages. Angui stood on the lookout, turning now and again to glance at the wounded. Ned eased Sansa down onto the trunk of a fallen tree, then turned to help Beric. The wound was deep, carved across his shoulder and down his upper arm. By all rights, it might have been mortal for another man, but Beric had learned to skirt the boundary between life and death so many times that it no longer seemed to fill him with dread. Even so, the pain tightened his jaw. Thuras murmured a prayer under his breath, tore strips of linen, and pressed them to the wound. They had no time to linger. They feared search parties might already be leaving the city, scouring the roads and riverside for any sign of intruders. Beric clenched his teeth against the sting as Thuras tended him. Sansa watched with wide eyes. Ned could sense the swirl of questions she was too afraid or too overwhelmed to ask. He gathered himself, mustering the calm that had once come so naturally when he served as Warden of the North. With a soft voice, he told her about the Brotherhood without banners. How they had saved him from the edge of the executioner's sword, how he had traveled with them through the Riverlands, working in secret to protect innocent folk from the depredations of war. Her eyes flicked from Beric's bandaged eye patch to Thuras's red robes, to Angui's well-worn bow, trying to piece together an image of these unlikely heroes. She lowered her head when Ned mentioned King's Landing. Her voice quivered. She said she had almost given up hope, that she had tried to be brave, praying each night for some miracle to spare her from another day of Joffrey's presence. Now she was free, but she hardly knew what awaited her beyond the city's walls. Ned took her hand, promising that they would soon return to Robb. She nodded, though her tears gathered anew. When Beric could walk again, somewhat shakily, though he refused to be carried, they struck off south along the riverbank. Their plan was to circle wide, avoiding the main roads, and meet up with their hidden allies who waited with horses a league or so downstream. A fisherman loyal to Thuras had stowed a small boat in a cluster of reeds. If the boat remained undiscovered, they could row farther into the quieter waterways that fed into the Blackwater's broader channel, weaving through marshes and hidden coves until they found the path that led west. That was the plan, at least, though each step seemed fraught with potential doom. The sound of distant hoofbeats would jolt them, or a shape on the horizon would send Angui crouching behind a fallen log with his arrow drawn. But luck, or the Lord of Light, or the old gods, some deity or happenstance, kept them safe. They found no patrols, and no watchman's horn sounded in alarm. By midday, they located the fisherman's cove. The man himself, a wizened fellow named Orland, sat half-dozing in a clumsy little skiff, fishing line trailing in the water. At the sight of Beric, Thuras, and Ned, he started, eyes going wide as if he expected the gold cloaks instead. But once he recognized them, relief replaced fear. They took the rowboat Orland had promised, a battered vessel with a single oar, and guided themselves farther up a narrow branch of the river where the fishermen said they would find a trail leading west. Even that short journey was arduous. The currents tugged them. They had to paddle in silence so as not to draw attention. Sansa gripped Ned's cloak, trembling whenever the boat rocked. Thuras, crouched at the bow, prayed softly for concealment. Somehow, the city's shadow receded behind them without incident, and they gained the relative safety of the grassy banks. At last they came ashore near a grove of slender birch. Two men waited in the dappled shade, Brotherhood scouts named Hal and Lou. They had 5 horses tethered there, plus supplies for a hurried journey. Thuras embraced them, thanking them for standing watch. Sansa looked worn to the bone, her face pale as she lifted a hand to shield her eyes from the midday sun. Ned stroked her hair gently, seeing how thin she had grown, as if all the color had been leached from her cheeks. He swore once again that he would see her safe. They mounted up. Angui took the lead, scanning the path ahead. Beric rode near the rear, stiff and grimacing from his wound but refusing to let anyone else stand guard behind. Thuras rode alongside him, holding him steady when he wavered. Ned positioned himself in the center with Sansa, who, though she had learned the ways of courtiers and queens, was still an adept horsewoman from her time in Winterfell. Even so, her movements were trembling and uncertain, and Ned kept a careful eye on her. They set off through farmland that had once provided grain and vegetables to the capital. The war had left many fields scorched, some farms abandoned, others half-ruined. In the distance, they spotted ragged peasants working feebly at half-plowed earth. No one paid much mind to the small band of riders disguised as common travelers. The real threat lay in any Lannister patrols that might pass by. They rode hard through the afternoon, seldom speaking more than a few words. Only once they had gotten well beyond the city's outskirts did Beric signal for them to slow. They reached a copse of willow near a trickling stream where they dismounted to water the horses. Sansa was shivering, though the day was warm. Ned noticed that her eyes had grown distant, haunted. She had not eaten since the night before. Gently, he urged her to take a piece of dried fruit, a bit of bread that the Brotherhood had in their saddlebags. She complied, though she could scarcely force it down. Thuras tried to muster a reassuring smile, telling her that each day away from King's Landing would bring her strength back. She tried to return the smile, tears glimmering in her blue eyes. Ned realized anew how young she was, scarcely a woman forced to face horrors no child should see. They pressed on. The plan was to skirt the Blackwater's southern edges until they could angle northward into the Riverlands, where they might find allies or at least friendly villages. Then they would circle around to meet Robb's host, which was rumored to be repositioning to maintain a feint at a southern approach. It was a complicated dance of misdirection, reliant on 1,000 small chances. News of Sansa's disappearance would reach the capital's nobility soon if it had not already. Cersei Lannister would rage, Joffrey would send orders, and Tywin would likely dispatch riders to shut down roads or put up tolls, searching for any sign of the missing daughter of Eddard Stark. That evening, they found a hollow hidden among thick pines, made a small camp, and lit no fire. They ate cold provisions, sipped water from the stream, and each took a turn on watch. Sansa slept fitfully, waking from nightmares. Ned kept her close, murmuring that she was safe, that no one would harm her now. Her tears came in silent waves. She pressed her face against his chest, ashamed of her fear but unable to calm herself. It was half heartbreak and half relief, the sudden collapse after so many moons of surviving on the edge. Ned only wished they could be safely home in Winterfell behind stout walls, away from the monstrous cruelty that had beset the South. If only he could take her there, if only the rest of his family could be made whole. But war still raged, and a father's wish was no shield against an entire realm in chaos. They rose before dawn and rode again, day after day, pushing themselves to exhaustion. Sansa's color gradually improved, though her spirit seemed subdued and wary, as if she feared that any sudden motion might reveal this to be a dream. The nights brought uneasy rest and the constant vigilance for roving bands of soldiers. Twice, they had to hide from small Lannister patrols trotting along the roads in pairs or trios. The patrols rarely carried banners, but their cloaks or the embroidery at their sleeves gave them away. On one such occasion, Ned and the others guided their horses down an embankment into a dry creek bed, while Sansa huddled behind a boulder. They waited breathlessly until the faint clip-clop of hooves passed by. Only then did they dare to continue, hearts thrumming in their chests. Once they reached the Riverlands, they found themselves threading a familiar patchwork of meadows and forests. Yet this land was not how Ned remembered it from his visits to Riverrun in peacetime. War had scarred everything. Farmsteads lay burnt or abandoned. The scattered peasants that remained hurried away at the sight of armed riders, hiding behind half-collapsed barns. Wolfish dogs prowled, snarling at the approach of strangers. The roads were rutted and half-washed out by autumn rains, with no lord or steward to maintain them. Occasionally, they passed half-eaten carcasses of animals or, worse, the remains of men strung up as warnings or trophies. The air carried the stench of decay. At such sights, Sansa covered her mouth in horror. Ned felt rage boil under his grief. It was one thing to know war inflicted suffering, but another to see it with his own eyes. Beric and Thuras said little, though the set of their jaws betrayed their fury. The Brotherhood without banners had tried to curb these atrocities, but there were too many raiders, too many armies for one group of outlaws to stop. On the 6th day after leaving King's Landing behind, they came across a small hamlet near a shallow ford. The houses were humble, thatched roof huts spaced around a muddy track. Smoke rose from a single chimney. Chickens pecked near a toppled fence. As they approached, a hunched figure emerged, an old woman in patched skirts, her gray hair hanging loose around her face. She squinted suspiciously at them, a spade clutched in her wrinkled hands. When Thuras hailed her gently, she spat on the ground and demanded to know their business. Yet once she recognized Beric's lightning sigil and realized these were the outlaws who had at times protected the small folk. She set down her spade and looked at them with something akin to relief. Beric asked if the old woman had seen any Lannister men about, or if Lord Robb Stark's host had passed that way recently. She said that knights bearing a wolf's head banner had ridden north a fortnight ago, but she knew no more. She also warned that a band of sellswords calling themselves the Bloody Mummers had been sighted in the region. At the mention of the Bloody Mummers, Thuras and Beric exchanged a grim look. Ned recalled too well the savage company they had fought before, men who took pleasure in unspeakable cruelty, in flaying captives and leaving them to die. He swallowed a surge of anger at the thought that these same men might be roaming near. The old woman had little food to spare, but she offered what she could, a few onions, a handful of apples. Sansa tried to give the woman a silver coin, but the old crone refused it, saying that coin meant little in a land where every soldier took what he wanted. Instead, she asked Beric to keep the mummers away if he could. He offered a solemn promise, though they all understood that few promises carried certainty in these times. Ned thanked the woman for her kindness, and they pressed on, hearts heavier than before. By twilight, they came to a clearing by a slow-flowing creek where they made camp in the cover of elm trees. Sansa seemed stronger, though she remained quiet. Ned, Beric, Thuras, and Angui gathered to discuss their next move. They needed to find Robb's forces, but with the region in tumult, exact knowledge of his whereabouts was elusive. Every rumor they heard placed him on a different course. There was also the matter of whether the Lannisters might anticipate Ned's attempt to reunite with Robb, given that they now knew Ned was alive, if that news had spread beyond King's Landing at all. Thuras suggested that they might consider heading toward Riverrun, hoping to find fresh word or send out a scout to contact any local lords still loyal to House Stark. Beric was reluctant to divide their group. They had so few men already, and if the Mummers or Lannisters caught any of them alone, it could be fatal. Ned listened carefully, weighing the dangers. He longed for a more direct route to his family, but was forced to accept that caution was necessary. Sansa joined them after a time, chewing on her lip with obvious worry. She asked if they would pass near Harrenhal, that dreadful fortress she had heard whispered about. She had gleaned bits of rumor in King's Landing that Arya might have been taken there. Ned's heart clenched. He knew that Arya had vanished in the chaos around his supposed execution, but no one had known for certain where she had gone. Some said she was in the Riverlands, disguised as a boy. Others claimed she had been captured by the Lannisters. That possibility tormented him. He and Sansa spoke softly, letting the others drift a few steps away for privacy. Sansa confessed that she sometimes heard mention of a Stark girl in Harrenhal, though she was never certain if it was Arya or merely rumor. Ned admitted that if the gods were kind, Arya was still out there somewhere, free. He prayed that was so. Still, the possibility of her captivity weighed on his mind. With that in mind, the next morning they resolved to head deeper into the Riverlands, skirting the roads that led to Harrenhal. Perhaps there, near the monstrous ruin, they might pick up further intelligence. If they learned that Arya was indeed a prisoner, they could devise a plan to rescue her as well. If they learned she had moved on, they would adjust accordingly. Beric pointed out that Harrenhal was more frequently controlled by whichever army last marched through the area, and it changed hands as often as the wind shifted direction. They needed to be wary, for if Gregor Clegane or Roose Bolton or some other cruel-minded commander held the fortress, infiltration would be as dangerous as sneaking into King's Landing. Yet Ned's determination was unwavering. He had rescued one daughter. He would not abandon the other. That decision settled, they broke camp and turned northwest. The days that followed blurred together in a sequence of careful, silent rides through forests turning gold with the coming autumn. They kept off the main roads, avoiding any sign of knights or soldiers, passing ruined villages or hidden hamlets. Sansa began to adjust to the rigors of the journey, though Ned noticed she always flinched at sudden noises. The memory of King's Landing weighed on her. Beric's wound grew stiff, despite Thurza's best efforts, but he pressed on without complaint, unwilling to slow them. More than once, they came across evidence of skirmishes, burned homesteads, fresh graves, the stench of death lingering on the wind. Angwy's expression hardened with each new atrocity. The Brotherhood had pledged to protect the weak, but the scale of destruction was overwhelming. One afternoon, as they rode through a stretch of rolling fields gone to weed, a column of black smoke appeared on the horizon. Alarm prickled through their small band. Smoke often meant a razed village or a blazing holdfast. They considered avoiding it entirely, not wishing to stumble into the aftermath of a battle or a group of brigands. But Ned felt compelled to see if there were survivors who needed help. Beric agreed, though caution laced his tone. They pressed on carefully, cresting a low hill that revealed a shallow valley below. In that valley stood a cluster of cottages, half of them aflame. Figures darted among the smoke, brandishing weapons. Over the crackle of fire carried the screams of terror. Sansa drew in a sharp breath and turned pale. Angwy peered through the drifting haze, searching for recognizable sigils or banners. He nudged his horse forward, and Thurza followed, squinting as he tried to discern the shapes below. Beric reined his horse in, turning to Ned. There were perhaps a dozen or more raiders. The village looked defenseless. Another atrocity. Ned felt the old urge for justice surge within him, echoing the same anger he had harbored at King's Landing, the same sense of duty that had fueled him when he fought for the innocent. Sansa gripped her reins, knuckles white. She whispered, "Father, we can't leave them." Ned exchanged a look with Beric. Both men felt the gravity of the moment. They were few: Ned, Sansa, Beric, Thurza, Angwy, plus the two other Brotherhood scouts. The raiders below might outnumber them, and who knew if they had archers or reinforcements. But to ride away from the screams was unthinkable. After a tense beat, Beric nodded. They would intervene. Sansa was told to remain on the hill with one of the scouts, where she might take cover if the worst came. She protested, but Ned insisted, unwilling to place her in harm's way so soon after rescuing her from a den of lions. Reluctantly, she agreed, though tears glittered in her eyes as she watched her father and the others spur their horses into the valley. They split into two groups. Beric, Ned, and Thurza rode straight toward the smoke, hoping to distract the raiders. Angwy and the second scout circled wide, intending to pick off stragglers with bows. The clatter of hooves on hard-packed earth drew the attention of the men in the village. They turned, revealing themselves as a ragtag band of Sellswords, battered armor bearing no consistent sigil, though Ned spotted the emblem of the bloody mummers on one man's shoulder, a patchwork cloak and the leer of a beast's head. Fury flared. He recalled the stories of their sadism. These were no common brigands, but organized thugs hired by one great lord or another. They were rummaging through the meager huts for food or valuables, possibly tormenting the peasants for sport. Several huts were ablaze, the thatch roofs spitting sparks into the air. Bodies lay in the dirt. Beric's voice rang out with a bold challenge. He shouted for them to cease, in the name of justice and the protection of the innocent. One of the Sellswords, a wiry man with scars across his cheek, bellowed a mocking laugh in response. He waved a spiked flail. Another man spat curses. A woman in a torn cloak emerged from a smoking cottage, stumbling, clutching the limp form of a child. One of the raiders lunged to drag her back. Ned's blood pounded in his ears. Without thinking twice, he spurred his horse forward. The man turned, startled, but not quickly enough. Ned's sword came down with a swift arc, the stroke biting deep into the raider's shoulder. The man shrieked, collapsing in a spray of blood. The woman stumbled away with her child, tears streaming, vanishing into the haze. The Sellswords roared in anger, Three advanced on Beric, who lifted his sword in a fluid motion, the flames of the burning huts reflecting on his blade. Thuras dismounted with surprising agility for a man of his size, smashing his cudgel into the gut of another Sellsword who rushed him. The man doubled over, retching. From the edge of the clearing, an arrow whistled, burying itself in the neck of one of the men who wore a patchwork cloak. Angwy's voice called a warning. Ned whirled his horse to face a tall brute wielding a morning star. The man swung wildly, the spiked ball flashing near Ned's head. Ned ducked aside and slashed low, cutting the brute's leg out from under him. The man roared, toppling in a flurry of curses. Another arrow claimed him before he could rise. A swirl of chaos ensued. The Sellswords, perhaps expecting little resistance, found themselves under fierce attack from skilled fighters. Beric took a wound to his upper thigh but pressed on, his sword flashing in a deadly rhythm. Thuras held prayers to the Lord of Light, the heavy cudgel rising and falling. The smell of smoke and blood mingled in the air. Horses screamed, rearing back from the flames. Angwy's arrows rained death from the perimeter, picking off any man foolish enough to raise his head. Ned felt adrenaline surge through his veins, driving out fatigue. He fought with a steady, measured intensity, the old skill learned in Robert's rebellion guiding each parry, each thrust. Within minutes, the Sellswords realized they were overmatched. Some tried to flee, running for the fields beyond the village. One made it far enough to vanish into the haze. Others were brought down by arrows or the blades of Beric's men. When the last of them fell, the small clearing was littered with corpses. Smoke billowed from two huts that still burned fiercely. Ned dismounted, searching for any villagers who might need help. He could hear whimpering from behind a stone wall. He found a group of peasants crouched there, eyes wide with terror, some clutching makeshift weapons like pitchforks or sharpened sticks. At the sight of Ned's drawn sword, they cowered. He raised both hands, showing he meant no harm. Gradually, they realized the raiders were dead or gone. One of the peasants, a gaunt man with soot-streaked cheeks, mumbled thanks before hurrying off to find water to douse the flames. Thuras and Angwy went from hut to hut, searching for survivors or any trapped by the fire. Beric leaned on his sword, breathing hard, bleeding from his leg. One of the peasants led a donkey laden with clay jugs to help extinguish the blaze. Ned crouched to catch his breath, tasting ash in the back of his throat. In saving these people, they had risked their own lives once again. Yet how could he regret it? The alternative was to ignore the screams, which was an affront to everything he believed in. Still, as he looked around at the battered huts and the cowering villagers, he understood how little one skirmish would change the war's toll on the common folk. The bloody mummers, or men like them, would keep coming. They spent the next hour helping however they could. The villagers seemed in shock, dazed by the speed of devastation and rescue alike. They had lost some of their own, but a few had survived, and that was better than it might have been. Thuras used cloth and salves to bind Beric's leg. Angwy retrieved his spent arrows and checked if any of the raiders were still alive. One man clung to life, moaning from a nasty belly wound, but he would not speak. He died soon after, ignoring the chance for last words. The stench of burned thatch hung thick. A child wailed nearby. Sansa, who had ridden down the hill once Angwy gave the all-clear, wandered into the village, tears brimming at the sight of destruction. Ned gently steered her away from the worst of it. This was not something she needed to see so soon after her own traumas. A few villagers approached Beric and Ned. They mumbled thanks, offering what little they had by way of gratitude. One man said he had recognized the patchwork cloaks and beastly emblems, the hated brave companions, known as the Bloody Mummers. Another wept for his wife, found slain in a burning hut. Sansa buried her face in Ned's cloak. Thuras tried to console the survivors, quoting lines about the Lord of Light guiding them. The villagers did not seem comforted. Ultimately, all Ned and the others could do was bury the bodies, do their best to quell the last embers of fire, and leave the villagers with such supplies as they could spare. Their duty compelled them onward. They had Sansa to protect, a war to navigate, and possibly another daughter to save. They left at first light the next morning, bidding the shaken villagers farewell. Each step away felt like leaving behind a tragedy that would soon be repeated elsewhere. Sansa asked why the mummers were allowed to roam free, and Ned could offer only the bitter truth that the realm was fractured and men of cruelty found ample opportunity to profit in chaos. The Brotherhood had tried to stop them whenever possible, but the outrages were too many and too widespread. Sansa pressed her lips together, nodding with silent resolve. She seemed older than her years, as if the illusions of courtly knights and chivalry had been entirely stripped away. After another few days, the land began to give way to harsher terrain, stony foothills and deeper forests. They drew closer to the lands surrounding Harrenhal. Even from afar, one could sometimes smell the faint tang of ash in the air, a ghostly reminder of the dragons that had once torched that colossal fortress. The tales said Harrenhal was cursed, and Ned could well believe it. The monstrous towers loomed over the surrounding landscape, visible from a great distance, a black silhouette of melted stone against the sky. He recalled passing it many times in earlier years, but never under such dire circumstances. The war had likely left Harrenhal in the hands of whichever lord or Sellsword company had last seized it. He prayed it would not be Gregor Clegane or Vargo Hoat and his mummers. But if it was, they needed to know. Perhaps they could glean word of Arya from the refugees that always seemed to cluster around the area. They chose a spot on a wooded ridge from which they could scout the fortress at a distance. Beric, Angui, and Thuras took turns peering through a battered old lens that one of the Brotherhood scouts carried, trying to spot banners. The massive curtain walls of Harrenhal made it difficult to glean details, but they did see men on the battlements wearing black and pink cloaks. Ned felt a chill as soon as Thuras murmured that observation. Black and pink was the sigil of House Bolton. It seemed Roose Bolton and his men had claimed Harrenhal. For Ned, the realization brought an uneasy swirl of relief and dread. Bolton was technically allied to Robb Stark. He was a bannerman of the North, but Ned had heard worrying tales of the man's methods, how his seat at the dread fort bred fear. Rumors of flaying and torture. If Bolton was here, that might complicate everything. Still, he was not the Mountain, and he was not the Mummers. This might mean there was a chance for negotiations or gleaning word of Arya. They approached carefully, leaving their horses tethered in a thick grove half a mile away, guarded by one of the scouts and Sansa. She was not pleased to be left behind again, but they convinced her it was safer. If Bolton was nominally an ally, it might still be dangerous to appear unannounced with only a handful of men. Ned, Beric, Thuras, and Angui walked the final distance on foot, clinging to cover as they drew near the fortress's outer environs. They found the drawbridge lowered, guards posted at the gate. Men in black and pink livery paced the walls. From a distance, Ned could see how Harrenhal's courtyards remained half-ruined as it had been for generations. The swirling legends of curses hung as thick as the crows that soared around its turrets. After a quick, hushed conversation, they decided that Ned should present himself openly as Eddard Stark, father of King Robb. If Roose Bolton was indeed loyal to the North, then Ned's appearance might grant them safe passage or, at the very least, the chance to ask about Arya. Beric and the others would remain hidden until Ned deemed it safe to reveal them. Thuras, who was known to many lords, agreed to accompany Ned as a show of good faith. Angui stayed back with his bow, ready to intervene if things went wrong. Though Ned doubted that would help much if Roose Bolton decided to arrest or kill them. Still, it gave them some sense of caution. So Ned and Thuras stepped out onto the dusty road that led to Harrenhal's main gate, walking at a measured pace. The guards on the walls spotted them quickly, crossbows at the ready. Ned called out that he was Eddard Stark, seeking audience with Lord Roose Bolton. The men seemed startled, uncertain. One barked that Eddard Stark was long dead, but Ned raised his voice again, commanding them to send word up the chain. After an exchange of skeptical looks, one guard disappeared inside, presumably to inform a superior. Ned and Thuras waited, tension coiling in the pit of Ned's stomach. Thuras rested a hand on the pommel of his sword, though in a non-threatening manner. At length, the guard returned. With clear reluctance, he gestured that they might approach. The portcullis began to rattle upward, the old chains clanking. Ned and Thuras passed beneath the towering gatehouse into the gloom of the outer courtyard. Within, Harrenhal was as grim as Ned remembered. The enormous castle dwarfed the men who walked it, its walls black and scarred. The courtyard was littered with muddy puddles, scattered hay, and broken rubble. One of the colossal towers loomed above them, its stones melted and twisted from dragonfire centuries before. Armed men in Bolton colors stood at intervals, regarding Ned and Thuras with suspicion. At the far side of the courtyard, a cluster of men emerged from a side building. At their center stood a pale man with a reserved, almost placid expression and dark, hooded eyes, Roose Bolton. He wore a cloak of black mottled with pink, pinned at the shoulder with a flayed man's sigil in tarnished silver. Ned felt his pulse quicken. Here was the man who had served as one of Robb Stark's trusted commanders, albeit from a distance. The man who had a reputation for cunning and cold brutality. If anyone in the North might turn on the Stark cause, it could be the dread fort's lord. Bolton assessed Ned with an unreadable gaze. A ghost of a smile curved his thin lips. He spoke quietly, forcing those around him to strain to hear. They told me that Eddard Stark is at my gates, but I was certain that was a jest. I saw your head on a spike in King's Landing. Or so I believed. Ned inclined his head, though he kept his posture firm. I was spared at the last moment by allies, Lord Bolton. It is a long story. But let us say I live. My son Robb knows the truth and he welcomes my counsel in the war effort. I came here hoping you might have knowledge of my daughter Arya's fate. Bolton's dark eyes flicked to Thuras, whom he recognized from the Red Priest's outlandish attire and reputation. He let a beat of silence pass. Then, in a measured tone, he said, "So you live indeed. This is quite the revelation. Your daughter Arya, you say? I recall hearing that a Stark girl was at Harrenhal for a time, serving as a cupbearer, though I never laid eyes upon her. I had assumed she was only a rumor or perhaps a common girl who used your daughter's name for protection. But rumor or not, she vanished from here before I took possession. The place changed hands so many times. First Lannister men, then the brave companions, then other forces. By the time I arrived, the girl was gone. Where she went is unknown to me." Ned felt a pang of equal parts relief and disappointment. If Arya had truly been here, at least she had not fallen into Bolton's hands. But now she was lost again, no closer to being found. "Thank you," he said quietly, though he hardly felt gratitude. "I had hoped for more certain news." Bolton regarded him with that calm, unnerving poise. "I am sorry to disappoint. As for your current state, might I inquire after King Robb? Word reached us that he was moving south, that he carried Jaime Lannister as prisoner, that there was a question of exchanging him for your daughters. But now you are alive, one daughter rescued and the other vanished. The war is full of uncertainties." Ned studied Bolton's face, searching for signs of duplicity. He found no easy read. "Robb continues to prosecute the war," he replied. "We had hoped to gather what intelligence we could and then return to his side. We value your loyalty, Lord Bolton, as one of Robb's foremost bannermen. The North stands as one we trust." Bolton's expression did not flicker at that thinly veiled test. He nodded once as if the unity of the North was obvious. "Indeed, Lord Stark. My men and I are loyal. I was sent here to hold Harrenhal and ensure that the Lannisters did not retake this fortress, though it is more ruin than stronghold. We have chased away smaller bands of raiders and the dregs of the brave companions. The Riverlands remain a nest of vipers, but we do what we can. You are welcome to rest here if you wish. My maester can tend any wounds or ailments. Food is not plentiful, but you may share what we have." Ned hesitated. The invitation could be a trap or it could be genuine courtesy from a northern bannerman. Beside him, Thuras glanced warily around, clearly harboring some suspicion. But refusing might offend Bolton or suggest Ned did not trust him. Given that Bolton commanded a considerable force in this region, it was unwise to make him an enemy unless they had proof of treachery. Ned inclined his head in thanks. "We would be grateful for a chance to rest, my lord. We have no illusions about Harrenhal's meager stores, and we need little. But I have men outside the walls, including my daughter Sansa, who has endured much. Perhaps the maester might see to her as well." Bolton gestured to one of his sub-commanders, ordering him to escort Ned's companions inside. Ned signaled to Angui, who lingered at a distance, to bring the rest in. Moments later, Sansa arrived, eyes wide as she took in the looming fortress. Ned introduced her to Lord Bolton, who inclined his head with a chilling politeness. She curtsied awkwardly, though her face betrayed wariness. Beric and Angui came too, nodding respectfully as Ned introduced them as allies in the fight for the North. Bolton noted Beric's bandaged leg with a flick of his gaze, then summoned a steward to guide them to some chamber or corner of the castle where they might rest. Harrenhal's interior was as grim as ever, sooty walls, half-collapsed corridors, drafty halls with broken windows. The Bolton men had done what they could to clear away debris and set up living quarters, but the scale of the castle dwarfed their efforts. In the great hall, the legendary massive hearth that once hosted feasts for thousands now glowed dimly with a small fire. Bolton's men camped in corners, cooking soup over braziers, sharpening swords on the cracked flagstones. An air of tense discipline reigned, no one seemed to laugh or sing. If the men of the Drevfort were cheerful about their station, they did not show it. Ned found it disquieting, but perhaps it reflected Bolton's own personality, silent, watchful, and cold. They were shown to a side chamber with battered cots and an old table. Sansa lowered herself onto one of the cots, exhausted. A maester arrived, a small, timid man with watery eyes, bringing bandages, salves, and some meager supplies of bread and salted meat. He tended Beric's leg properly, redressing the wound, checking for infection. Thuras watched the maester's work carefully, muttering about the Lord of Light's blessings. Ned encouraged Sansa to eat. The bread was hard, the meat tough, but she forced down a few bites. The maester examined her, noting her thinness, prescribing rest and warm broth. Sansa nodded mutely. Then the maester came to Ned, checking for any wounds from the recent skirmishes. Ned waved him off gently, saying his bruises were of little concern. In time, they received word that Lord Bolton would speak privately with Ned in one of the upper rooms. Ned rose, telling Sansa and the others to remain on guard. They understood the subtle warning in his tone, trust no one wholeheartedly in this place. Bolton's men escorted him up a winding staircase, then along a corridor that smelled of damp stone and old rot. They paused at a door, knocked, and ushered Ned inside. The room, likely once a solar, was large enough but sparsely furnished. Bolton stood by a window slit, the gray light accentuating his pallid features. A single brazier glowed in the center of the room, warding off the chill. The guards closed the door, leaving Ned alone with the Lord of the Dreadfort. Bolton inclined his head in greeting, his voice low and cool. He said he wished to speak with Ned about the state of the war, about the Iron Throne's next moves, about the North's prospects. Ned watched him carefully, recalling how Robb's letters had mentioned Bolton's strategic cunning. They spoke of the battles that had already raged, of Tywin Lannister's cunning alliances. Bolton posed pointed questions. Did Ned truly believe the realm would accept Robb as king in the north if they somehow toppled the Lannisters? Did Ned think Stannis Baratheon, who claimed the throne, would spare the north or attempt to subdue it? Ned answered with caution, acknowledging the many uncertainties but affirming that the north had never sought dominion over the south, only independence if the southern realm refused to respect the north's ways and borders. Bolton listened with an enigmatic half-smile. Then Bolton asked about Sansa. Why risk infiltration of King's Landing for her when the realm was at stake? Ned struggled to keep his composure, insisting that no father would abandon his child and that the war was as much about protecting the innocent as it was about kingship. Bolton's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. Instead, he offered a vague statement about how House Bolton had always admired House Stark's sense of duty. Then he changed the subject, inquiring after Jaime Lannister's captivity. Ned explained briefly how Robb still held Jaime, hoping to exchange him for Sansa and Arya at one point. The conversation wandered to the matter of the phrase, the uneasy alliance with Walder Frey and the precarious crossing at the Twins. Bolton nodded, absorbing every detail with the same unsettling calm. At length, Bolton dismissed Ned with a final comment that Harrenhal was open to the king in the north whenever he chose to come, but that Bolton would remain vigilant for Lannister counterstrikes. He also alluded to the rumored approach of Tywin's army from the west, which might threaten them all if they were not prepared. Ned left that meeting uneasy, suspecting that Bolton's loyalty was more complicated than it appeared. Yet for now there was no open betrayal. Perhaps the mere presence of the father of the king in the north kept Bolton from any rash move. Ned returned to Sansa, deciding that they would linger in Harrenhal no longer than necessary. Over the next day, Ned heard scraps of gossip from Bolton's soldiers. Some said that Arya Stark had indeed been in Harrenhal under the Lannisters' occupation, but that she vanished after the bloody mummers turned on the Lannisters and chaos erupted. No one knew where she went, only that she slipped away one night, perhaps with two companions, an older boy and a black-haired youth. The rumors were contradictory, but all suggested she had not remained in Harrenhal. Ned seized upon that faint hope. Arya was quick and resourceful. If she escaped the fortress, maybe she was still alive, heading north to find her mother or her brothers. Sansa tried to hide her disappointment that they couldn't retrieve Arya at once. But she took courage in the idea that her sister might be free. Meanwhile, Beric and Thuras scouted discreetly around the castle's perimeter, verifying that Bolton truly held the place and that no hidden force of mummers lurked nearby. They returned with mixed impressions. Harrenhal was indeed in Bolton's grip, though the man had fewer soldiers than one might expect for such a massive fortress. Perhaps he awaited reinforcements from the Dreadfort. Beric also sensed an undercurrent of fear among the men, as if Bolton enforced discipline with a heavy hand. But they found no immediate sign of treachery toward Ned or Sansa. They concluded that their best move was to depart quickly before any advantage of surprise or intimidation wore off. The next morning, Ned informed Bolton that he would be riding out. Bolton offered no objection, only a thin smile and a reminder that if Ned encountered Tywin Lannister's armies, he would find no easy path back to Harrenhal. Ned bowed stiffly, thanking him. He could not banish the feeling of a viper coiled behind the man's polite words. Ned, Sansa, Beric, Thuras, Angui, and the two scouts departed Harrenhal's gates soon after. The black stone towers vanished behind them in the haze of morning. Sansa rode close to Ned, occasionally glancing back at the looming fortress as though half expecting a volley of arrows to follow them. But none came. They pressed on, aiming to angle northward where they might find Robb's host if the rumors held true that he was shifting his forces to the region near the twins. The time for subterfuge was nearly over. Ned wanted to stand openly by his son's side, revealing to all the lords of the Trident and the North that Ned Stark still lived. Perhaps that would rally more to their cause. Or it might spark desperation in the Lannisters. Either way, secrecy had served its purpose. Now the war demanded resolution. Yet the journey was perilous. The roads crossing the Riverlands were patrolled by Lannisters in places, by Freymen in others, sometimes even by scoundrels or turncoats wearing half a dozen different badges. The lines of loyalty had grown so blurred that no traveler could be certain who might be friend or foe. Ned had to rely on the Brotherhood's network of sympathizers, small folk who recognized Beric, or Angui, who recalled them from earlier acts of protection. These folk sheltered the group in barns or hidden cellars, providing bread and meat in exchange for the promise that the outlaws would continue their stand against tyranny. Sansa observed these encounters with wide eyes. In King's Landing, peasants had mostly cowered from her or spat upon her name, blaming the Northmen for the war. Here, in the battered heart of the conflict, she saw that some truly loved the Stark cause, or at least the mercy that outlaws like Beric offered. They had to be vigilant about larger enemy forces. On the third day out from Harrenhal, a ragged shepherd hailed them, warning that a Lannister column of 200 men was marching north along the main road, burning farmsteads as they went. Ned's group shifted east to avoid them, which forced them to cross a boggy stretch of land with fetid water and swarms of biting insects. It was a miserable trek, especially for Sansa, who had never been forced to endure such conditions. But she did not complain, struggling onward. She confessed to Ned in a whisper that each hardship was still easier than another day in King's Landing under Joffrey's cruelty. They emerged from the bog half-starved and filthy, clothes caked in mud, boots squelching. Thoros joked about the sacrifices they made for the light of justice, though he coughed at times from the stench of the bog. Beric's legs seemed to trouble him more in the damp air, but he soldiered on without complaint. They eventually found a small settlement on higher ground, where they managed to wash and buy a few loaves of bread from a trembling baker. With each league they traveled, Ned felt the tension coil tighter in him. The roads were no safer than before, yet they were drawing nearer to Robb. He sensed it, as if the family bond called him onward. At last, after another week of weary travel, they encountered a patrol wearing the wolf's head sigil of House Stark. Ned spotted them first, a group of 6 riders on a wooded path, scanning for threats. Quickly, Ned's group slowed, raising empty hands to show they were no threat. The Stark patrol halted, suspicious at first, until they noticed Beric's lightning sigil and recognized the outlaws. One man demanded to know their names. Ned dismounted, pushing back his hood. The patrol captain blinked in astonishment, hardly believing he beheld the face of Ned Stark. Ned explained that he and his daughter had come to join Robb. The captain, still reeling, offered to guide them to the main encampment. He said that King Robb was not far away, near a place called High Oak Hill, where the combined northern and Riverland forces were gathering. They rode with renewed urgency. Every mile felt like an impatient heartbeat. The patrol captain's men exchanged whispers, some praising the gods for Ned's miraculous survival, others scarcely daring to believe it was truly him. Sansa, too, seemed to gain a second wind, her spirits lifting at the thought of seeing her brother again. Beric rode silently, presumably content that this was the moment he had envisioned since he saved Ned. Thoros rubbed his bearded chin, perhaps offering a silent prayer of thanks. Angui kept his eyes on the trees, as usual wary of ambush. By late afternoon they sighted the banners, the direwolf of House Stark, the trout of House Tully, and scattered sigils of northern bannermen, Umber, Karstark, Manderley, Glover, and more. They had raised a sprawling camp across rolling meadows near a thick forest. Dozens of tents dotted the gentle slopes. Sentries manned a rough palisade fence. Fires crackled, sending thin curls of smoke into the sky. Armed men bustled about, drilling, tending horses, preparing evening meals. Ned felt a surge of pride and relief. This was Robb's host, battered by months of fighting but still standing. Soon, father and son would be truly reunited in a place of relative safety. At the sight of Ned's approach, men in the camp began to stir, pointing, murmuring. Some recognized the Brotherhood's presence. Others noticed the tall man dismounting near the palisade, gray in his beard, with Sansa at his side. Word spread like wildfire. Ned Stark, men whispered in disbelief. He lives. A hush of awe followed in their wake. Ned felt a lump in his throat at the astonished reverence in their eyes, the glimmers of hope. He saw older veterans who had ridden with him in Robert's rebellion, tears shining in their eyes as they recognized their former liege lord. He saw younger faces filled with wonder, men who had grown up hearing stories of Ned Stark's honor. The patrol captain guided them to the largest tent, the command pavilion, where a group of northern lords stood in urgent conversation. At their center was Robb himself, clad in mail and a fur-trimmed cloak, his auburn hair grown longer than before. The boy of 15 Ned had left behind had become a hardened young man, shaped by war and leadership. Grey Wind, the huge dire wolf, sat near Robb's side, ears twitching. As Ned neared the tent, Grey Wind caught his scent, lifted his great head, and let out a soft whine, half recognition, half surprise. Robb turned, his expression morphing from deep concentration to stunned joy. Then he was pushing past the lords in front of him, striding toward Ned with arms outstretched. Father and son embraced as men looked on. Some cheered. Others stood silent, overcome. Sansa rushed into Robb's arms next, tears streaming down her cheeks, half laughing, half sobbing. Robb pressed his cheek to her hair, voice trembling, whispering that he was sorry she had suffered so long. She gripped him fiercely, as if afraid to let go. The sight filled Ned with gratitude beyond words. At that moment, nothing else mattered, neither war nor politics, only that his children were alive and together. Grey Wind nosed at Ned's hand, whining softly. Ned patted the direwolf's thick fur, recalling how small the creature had once been when found alongside the road north of Winterfell. Now he was a massive beast, reflecting the transformation of Robb himself. The young king broke away from Sansa, tears in his eyes, and met his father's gaze. "You're safe," Robb said, voice quivering with relief. "By all the gods. I thought we had lost you forever." Ned's own eyes were damp as he grasped Robb's shoulder. "I owe my life to the Brotherhood, to men and women who believed that I had a part yet to play, and to you, my son, for marching to free me when you believed I was a captive. Forgive me for the burdens placed upon you. I never wished you to bear a crown so young." Robb swallowed hard, glancing around at the ring of onlookers, northern bannermen, Tully men, and the like. The great John was there, wearing a wide grin of astonishment. Lady Catelyn was not in sight. Ned felt a pang, wondering if she was away on some mission or inside one of the other tents. Robb cleared his throat, speaking in a stronger voice, tempered by leadership. "We have prayed for this day, Father, for your return. We'll hold a feast, whatever we can manage, for this miracle. But first we must speak privately. Much has changed since we last stood face to face." The lords parted, and Ned walked with Robb and Sansa into the large pavilion, Grey Wind padding behind. Beric, Thuras, and Angwy followed, drawing curious looks from the gathered men, who recognized the outlaws but did not protest. The interior of the pavilion was spacious, lit by lanterns, with a large table in the center strewn with maps and dispatches. Robb's commanders ringed the table: Brynden Blackfish Tully, Edmure Tully, the great John Umber, Galbart Glover, and several others. They gaped at Ned, as though seeing a legend come to life. The Blackfish, stern-faced but not unkind, welcomed Ned with a curt nod. Edmure stammered out a greeting, still too flabbergasted to say much. The great John slapped his thigh, roaring with laughter and joy, proclaiming that the old wolf had returned. Others stood in awed respect. Ned offered quiet thanks, his voice wavering with the weight of the moment. He told them how he had been saved in King's Landing, how he had traveled with the Brotherhood, how he had recently rescued Sansa, and how they now came to support Robb's cause openly. He omitted details that might compromise future plans, but the gist was enough to stun the assembled lords. One by one, they pledged their loyalty anew, reaffirming that their swords belonged to House Stark. Robb asked about Arya, and Ned repeated what he had learned from Harrenhal, how she had escaped but vanished anew. Robb's expression was troubled, but hope flickered that she still lived. In return, Ned learned the full state of the war as Robb and his bannermen presented it. They had struck victories against the Lannisters earlier, capturing Jaime, but the momentum had stalled. Tywin had regrouped, forging alliances with the Freys and the Tyrells. Stannis Baratheon's defeat at the Blackwater had left King Joffrey in a stronger position. Meanwhile, the Ironborn harried the North's coasts, seizing Deepwood Motte and Torrhen Square. Betrayals had already split the Northern Lords' loyalties. Rickard Karstark was in open conflict with Robb over Jaime's fate. Many men were lost. Supplies grew scarce. They had pinned their hopes on a possible exchange of Jaime for the Stark girls, or at least for Sansa, but that was now moot as Sansa stood among them. The question of what to do with Jaime loomed large. Karstark demanded his head. Some of Robb's advisors, including Lady Catelyn, who had gone to treat with the Freys, feared that executing Jaime would only provoke Tywin's wrath. Ned listened gravely, feeling the burden of leadership settle on him once more, though this time in counsel to his son rather than as the sole lord of Winterfell. At the end of these discussions, Ned placed a steady hand on Robb's shoulder. He reminded them all of the North's code: a lord who passes a sentence must swing the sword. If Jaime was to die for his crimes, who would that truly serve? Would it bring them closer to peace? Was there any remaining leverage in keeping the Kingslayer alive, perhaps to exchange for other northern prisoners or to hold the Lannisters at bay? The debate raged. Karstark was not present, but his men glowered at any suggestion of sparing Jaime, remembering how he had cut down Rickard's sons. Others pointed out that Sansa was free only because they had risked everything to rescue her themselves. She no longer served as a bargaining chip. Ned interjected softly that Arya was still unaccounted for and there might be other northern captives. Was that not worth something? Robb's face was etched with worry. He confessed that the tension with Karstark had grown perilous. Karstark had threatened to desert to take his men home, leaving Robb's host dangerously weakened. Ned studied his son's features, recalling how he had once navigated the complexities of southern politics in King Robert's court. Now Robb faced an even greater challenge, holding together a fractious alliance while waging a war on multiple fronts. The return of Eddard Stark might bolster morale, but it could not erase the divisions overnight. When the council finally broke for the evening, Ned found a quieter corner of the pavilion with Robb and Sansa. The siblings clung to each other, relief shining in their faces. Robb asked Sansa if she was all right, if the Lannisters had hurt her. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she spoke in halting words about Joffrey's cruelties, the humiliations, the beatings, everything shy of actual murder. Robb's fists clenched, his fury plain. Grey Wind nosed at Sansa's side as if offering comfort. Ned placed a calming hand on Robb's arm, reminding him that vengeance must be tempered by duty, that they would see justice done in time. Robb nodded, though the anger in his eyes did not fade. At last, Sansa asked the question that had been hovering unspoken since their reunion: "Where's Mother?" Robb sighed, explaining that Lady Catelyn had gone north to the twins, hoping to mend the alliance with Walder Frey. The crossing was essential for any movement between the north and the south. The Freys had begun making demands, including marriages for certain Frey children, overshadowed by the fiasco of Robb's own broken betrothal to a Frey daughter. Sansa's face fell. She had missed seeing her mother. Robb tried to reassure her that Catelyn would return soon. Ned felt a pang of regret, recalling how he had once parted from Catelyn under the impression he would see her in only a few moons. Now so much had changed, and they were all battered by war. He told Robb and Sansa that if Walder Frey could be appeased or at least kept in check, they might be able to focus on the immediate threat: Tywin Lannister. If Tywin marched north, the Riverlands would be a battleground once more. Robb mentioned rumors of Tywin's intent to lure the North into a disadvantageous confrontation. Ned offered to help plan, to bring whatever experience he had from Robert's rebellion and from his time with the Brotherhood. Robb's shoulders seemed to lighten at that, as if the weight no longer belonged to him alone. They stood then, the three Starks huddled with Grey Wind between them, forging a small circle of family unity amid the swirling chaos of war. That night, the northern host held a modest feast to celebrate Eddard Stark's return and Sansa's rescue. Word spread through the camp like wildfire, and men gathered in clusters around roaring fires, passing skins of ale, laughing in relief. The direwolf banner snapped in the wind. Beric and Thuras joined the festivities, though they kept to a corner, half unaccustomed to such gatherings as outlaws who had roamed the wild places for so long. Angui found a few archers from the north and began swapping stories of feats with the bow, the men quickly losing themselves in friendly rivalry. Ned and Sansa sat with Robb at the head of a long table that had been crudely fashioned from barrel staves. The Greyjohn roared a series of toasts, each bellow louder than the last. The Blackfish gave Ned a respectful nod from across the table, though he seemed more subdued than the Umber Lord, sipping ale quietly. Edmure Tully, still wrestling with the burdens of protecting Riverrun, congratulated Ned, trying to hide the tension in his own voice. Minstrels played a few lively tunes on lute and drum, though the general mood was tempered by months of hardship. Yet for one night, the northern men allowed themselves a semblance of joy. Sansa tried to smile, though occasionally her eyes filled with tears as she recalled the torments she had endured. Ned squeezed her hand, reminding her they were safe now. She nodded, grateful. In the days that followed, Ned resumed the role of a senior advisor in Robb's war councils, standing beside his son, hearing reports from scouts and outriders, discussing strategies to counter Tywin's maneuvers. With each passing day, the men of the camp grew more confident, buoyed by the knowledge that Ned Stark, the honorable lord they had revered, was not only alive but standing among them. The simple fact of his presence served as a rallying symbol, a sign that the Starks could endure anything. Morale rose. Even the weather seemed more forgiving, with a stretch of sunny autumn days that banished the gloom of the bogs. Yet the war was far from won. Scouts reported that Tywin Lannister's forces were massing near a crossroads to the west, forging alliances with local lords who hoped to share in Lannister victory. Word also came of further Ironborn incursions in the north, as Balon Greyjoy sought to exploit the distraction of war. Catelyn sent a raven from the twins, indicating that Walder Frey was more demanding than ever, pressing for another betrothal arrangement, perhaps to secure Sansa in marriage to a Frey scion now that she was free from Joffrey. Ned felt his stomach twist at the notion, unwilling to see Sansa thrown into another political match so soon. Robb read the letter with a grimace, clearly frustrated by Frey's intransigence. Karstark's men, sullen in their tents, demanded a reckoning for Jaime Lannister. Ned advised Robb to hold Jaime a while longer, though that might stoke Karstark's anger further. The tension threatened to boil over. Karstark himself glared at Ned with resentment, as if blaming him for interfering in the vengeance owed to his dead sons. Robb tried to placate the old lord, acknowledging his grief but urging him to see the bigger picture. Ned understood that they would have to address the Jaime problem soon, or risk a schism that could tear the northern host apart. Meanwhile, Beric's presence also stirred curiosity. Men asked if the Lightning Lord truly could not die, if the Red Priest's prayers brought him back from the grave. Thuras shrugged off such questions. Beric, for his part, offered little comment, occasionally sparring with northern knights, demonstrating a skill that belied his injuries. Sansa watched him with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. Ned reminded himself that these were the men who had saved him in King's Landing, who had put their lives on the line to rescue Sansa. He vowed never to forget that debt. Amid these tensions and rumors, Robb decided to send forth envoys to Walder Frey, hoping to finalize some arrangement that would secure the crossing. Another letter arrived from Lady Catelyn, stating she was negotiating a new agreement that might keep the Freys from outright betrayal. Edmure Tully would wed one of Frey's daughters, or so it seemed. Edmure's face fell at that news, but he accepted it as his duty. The entire camp braced for a movement northward, hoping to confront the Ironborn or at least secure their own territory, but that required crossing the twins. If Walder Frey refused them passage, they would be trapped in the south, forced to either battle Tywin on unfavorable ground or retreat deeper into the Riverlands. Neither was a good option. Ned participated in these councils, offering what counsel he could. He emphasized that they needed to stand unified, that Karstark's anger could not be allowed to tear the north apart. He also pressed the need for continued caution with Tywin, who was a cunning foe. Robb listened, balancing his father's advice with the demands of his lords. Sansa lingered near, mostly silent, occasionally interjecting if asked about the capital's politics. She still wore the scars of her captivity in her wary eyes, but she tried to help by recounting how the Lannisters once planned alliances with certain Riverland houses, or how the crown might respond to certain northern moves. As the days stretched on, scouts began returning with alarming news. The Lannisters were indeed on the move. Tywin had marched with a large force, joined by some Frey banners who might be hedging their bets, uncertain if Robb's alliance with Walder Frey would hold. A confrontation loomed. The rumor was that Tywin hoped to pin the Northmen between his force and the Freys at the crossing, effectively forcing Robb into a pitched battle he could not win. Robb's lords debated meeting Tywin head-on or trying to lure him into an ambush. Ned insisted that they avoid a direct pitched battle where Tywin held numerical advantage. He proposed a strategy reminiscent of the tactics he used against the Targaryens decades ago: strike swiftly at smaller Lannister detachments, feign retreats, and draw Tywin into disadvantageous terrain. Robb, the Blackfish, and the Great John nodded thoughtfully, seeing merit in it. In a private moment, Ned urged Robb to remain flexible. Do not let Tywin set the terms. If the Freys betray us, we'll need a contingency to retreat north by another route or to hold out until we can secure help. The realm is in chaos. Perhaps Stannis might re-emerge in some fashion, or the Tyrells might shift loyalties if the wind changes. We must not count on such changes, but we should be prepared. Robb agreed, albeit with a rueful smile. He confessed that while he had learned much in the crucible of war, he never felt fully prepared for the unpredictability of lords and armies. Ned squeezed his shoulder, reminding him that no one ever did. Even Robert Baratheon, for all his charisma, had struggled to keep the realm united after winning the throne. Honor and cunning must work in tandem if they wished to see the North free and their family safe. Sansa found a place in the camp, assisting the healers who tended to the wounded. She learned to grind herbs and apply poultices, though it turned her stomach at times. Still, she felt a sense of purpose in helping. The men who recognized her whispered that she was a true daughter of House Stark, showing compassion and bravery despite her ordeal. She was no longer the naive girl daydreaming of shining nights. She had seen the cruelty of war and survived. Ned watched her with paternal pride, though sorrow weighed on him, knowing how she had been forced to grow up too quickly. Meanwhile, Beric and Thuras circulated through the camp, forging alliances of their own. They coaxed younger knights away from cynicism, spinning tales of how the Brotherhood had aided the small folk. Some knights looked askance at the idea of an outlaw band joining a king's host, but Ned spoke up for them, ensuring they were treated with respect. After all, without them he would not be standing there. At last, the cogs of war turned in such a way that the northern host had to move. Word came that Tywin's vanguard was only a few days' march away, intending to cross a large expanse of farmland to the west. Robb believed they might catch that vanguard off guard and weaken Tywin before the main army arrived, provided they marched swiftly. Orders were given. Tents were struck. Wagons loaded. Drums beat out a marching cadence. The Great John led a contingent of foot soldiers. Brynden Tully commanded scouts on the flanks. Karstark's men, sullen but still with the host, followed grudgingly. Ned rode near Robb at the front, Sansa safely ensconced at the rear guard with the healers and baggage train, protected by a formidable escort. Grey Wind trotted at Robb's side. Beric and Thuras accompanied the outriders, scanning for signs of ambush. The entire column snaked across the rolling hills, forging toward the uncertain promise of battle. For days they marched, tension mounting. Scouts reported glimpses of the Lannister colors in the distance, red and gold banners waving in the autumn breeze. Dust clouds on the horizon signified thousands of feet shuffling along the roads. Ned could almost taste the fear and anticipation in the air. Soldiers checked their gear anxiously. Swords were honed, arrow fletchings inspected. Drummers kept a steady beat. The nights brought only fitful sleep, haunted by the knowledge that by the next sunrise, blood might be spilled in earnest. Eventually, they drew near the farmland that scouts said the Lannister vanguard would traverse. It was a wide, open space with a few scattered copses of trees, dotted by winding irrigation ditches. Robb, recalling Ned's counsel, decided to position archers behind one copse and cavalry behind another, aiming to strike the vanguard's flanks. The main northern force would pretend to be caught off guard, luring the Lannisters forward. It was a bold plan, risky. If the Lannisters suspected a trap or if they deployed more men than expected, the Northmen could be overwhelmed. But to do nothing was to lose the initiative. Ned stood with Robb on a small rise, watching the dust clouds to the west. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows. Sansa was behind the lines, away from the immediate fighting, though the thought of her anywhere near this potential bloodbath knotted Ned's stomach. Still, the war had come to them and there was no turning back. Robb exhaled slowly. Ned placed a hand on his son's shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. They exchanged a look, father and son, side by side. No matter the outcome, they would face it together. At dusk, sentries came running with word that the Lannister vanguard was not days away but hours. Torchlight flickered on the horizon, indicating a forced march. Robb cursed softly, realizing Tywin's men were pushing their pace. Orders were shouted to the northern ranks, archers to their positions, cavalry to the flanks, foot soldiers in a half-circle around the rise. Ned took his place in the front lines with Robb, wanting to show solidarity. The men recognized him and cheered quietly for their lord, though fear tinged their voices. They had never expected to see Ned Stark leading them into battle again. Now he stood, sword at his hip, the gray streaks in his hair a testament to age and wisdom. Gray wind paced restlessly, sniffing the air. Darkness fell, and the men waited, hearts pounding. No one slept. In the middle of the night, a scout returned. The Lannisters were near enough that a clash could come by dawn. Robb gathered his closest commanders for one final council in the flickering lantern light. Ned reminded them to hold discipline, to strike hard when Robb gave the signal, to keep a path of retreat open in case Tywin's main host arrived unexpectedly. After that, there was nothing left to do but wait. Men murmured prayers to the old gods, to the Seven, even to the Lord of Light. The faint, gray light of dawn revealed the Lannister vanguard approaching across the farmland, moving in columns under the command of lesser knights. Their banners stirred in the chill breeze. At a distance, it was hard to gauge their numbers, but scouts said at least 3,000 men, with more behind. The northern host had a similar count, though advantage lay in the terrain if they could exploit it. Robb orchestrated a feigned disorganized look, scattering some men in shallow lines, luring the vanguard to charge. From his vantage on the rise, Ned watched anxiously, his heart thudding like a war drum. Sure enough, the Lannister horns blared and the vanguard began a steady advance. Their cavalry formed up on the left, foot soldiers in the center, crossbowmen behind. They likely believed themselves more than a match for what they perceived as a single Stark column. A hush fell, broken only by the jangle of armor and the tramp of boots. Ned could see the tension in the lines of the northern men, some who had never faced a large-scale engagement. They looked to Robb, to the Great John, to Ned himself. Robb lifted his sword, giving a silent command to hold fast. The Lannister cavalry thundered forward, aiming to smash through the northern lines. On the rise, Robb waited until they were nearly in range, then dropped his arm. A trumpet call echoed. Suddenly, northern archers burst from the trees on the right flank, unleashing a volley of arrows that raked the Lannister riders. Men toppled from saddles, horses rearing in panic. On the left flank, hidden cavalry under the Greyjohn's command charged out, slamming into the Lannister footmen who reeled in confusion. A ripple of chaos spread through the vanguard, men shouting, horns blaring. Ned leapt into action, drawing his sword, leading a surge of infantry down the rise to crash into the disordered Lannisters. Battle erupted in a clamor of steel and screams. Ned's world narrowed to the ring of swords, the jostle of bodies, the thunder of hoofs. He parried a blow from a Lannister spearman, slicing him down with a swift riposte. Another rider galloped past, hacking at a northern foot soldier, but Ned lunged, cutting the rider from the saddle. Dust choked his lungs. Around him, men grappled and died, arrows peppered the ground, and the acrid smell of blood and sweat hung in the air. Gray wind lunged into the fray, dragging men from horses with savage ferocity. Robb fought nearby, steel flashing, face set in grim determination. The initial strike caught the vanguard off balance, forcing them to reel back. But their commanders rallied, forming a shield wall to blunt the northern charge. Crossbow bolts whirred overhead, some striking men around Ned. Shouts mingled with moans of the wounded. A horn signaled another Lannister wave joining the fray from the rear. The fighting grew desperate. Ned barked orders to hold the line, to keep pressing. Arrows from the northern archers continued to harass the Lannisters, but they could not prevent the reinforcements from drawing closer. Robb signaled the Great John to flank again, but the Greyjohn's riders were mired in hand-to-hand combat. Ned spotted a cluster of Lannister knights trying to break through to the rise. He rallied a handful of men and rushed to intercept, sword gripped tight in calloused hands. A burly knight came at him with a mace. Ned dodged, slashing the man across the chest, denting plate. Another knight battered one of Ned's companions to the ground before Ned drove his blade through the man's back. All around, the clang of metal resounded. Mud and blood splattered Ned's boots. He kept fighting, refusing to yield an inch. Despite the ferocious resistance, the Lannister vanguard began to falter. Gaps opened in their lines. The surprise assault on their flanks had sown confusion. Robb seized the momentum, ordering a final push. Trumpets blared, men roared. Ned joined the surge, forcing back the last remnants of the Lannister front. Knights and infantry alike broke ranks, retreating in disarray. Some cast aside weapons, fleeing across the fields. Others fought to the death. Robb's outriders gave chase, capturing stragglers. By mid-morning, the farmland was littered with corpses. The Lannister vanguard lay in ruin, dozens taken prisoner, the rest scattered. A ragged cheer rose from the northern ranks. Ned leaned on his sword, panting, blood dripping from the steel. Robb dismounted nearby, equally soaked in grime, gray wind at his side, muzzle smeared with red. The young king's chest heaved, adrenaline still coursing. They exchanged a look, father and son, forging victory together. Men rushed to clap Ned on the shoulder, cheering his name. The great Jon whooped triumphantly, his deep voice echoing across the battlefield. Beric appeared, limping slightly, sword in hand, grinning through the haze of dust and smoke. Thurz strode up, offering a quick prayer of thanks. Angui pulled an arrow from a fallen knight's back, shaking his head at the carnage. The day was theirs for now. Yet even in victory, Ned's heart felt heavy. The field was strewn with the dead and dying, men who had marched for the Lannisters perhaps out of duty or fear. Northern casualties, too, marred the soil. War was a grim business, offering no genuine glory. Robb wasted no time ordering medics to tend the wounded. He directed men to sort the prisoners, see if any knights among them carried valuable information about Tywin's main host. Ned joined in overseeing the cleanup, his limbs aching. He thought of Sansa, safely in the rear, and offered a silent prayer of gratitude that she had been spared this bloodshed. Word soon reached them that Tywin's main force was still a day's march away. Robb convened an immediate council on the battlefield, calling in the Blackfish, the Great Jon, Ned, Beric, and others. They debated whether to hold this ground, risking confrontation with Tywin's entire army, or withdraw, forcing Tywin to chase them. Ned urged caution. They had wounded men, they had spent much of their momentum, and Tywin would be furious at the loss of his vanguard. If they faced the Lannister host here, they might be overwhelmed. Better to move north, possibly drawing Tywin after them, away from any direct link to King's Landing. If Walder Frey could be persuaded to allow them across the Twins, they might lure Tywin into a difficult crossing or a stalemate. Robb weighed these arguments, then announced they would retreat north with haste, not to flee cowardly, but to preserve their advantage by choosing the next battlefield on their own terms. Thus began a grueling forced march away from the site of victory, leaving behind smoldering farmland and mounds of dead. The men grumbled at moving so soon after winning a battle, but they obeyed. Karstark's forces in particular muttered, though Karstark himself could not deny that they needed to reorganize. Sansa was brought out briefly to see Ned, tears filling her eyes at the sight of blood staining his tunic, but he reassured her that he was unhurt aside from bruises. She clung to him, trembling with relief. He kissed her brow, promising that once they reached safer ground, they would rest. Then they pressed on, an entire army moving north through fields and forest, hoping to stay a step ahead of Tywin's wrath. And so the war continued, a desperate dance of maneuver and countermaneuver, bargains with lords and entreaties to the phrase. But through it all, Ned Stark persevered, determined to protect his children and honor his vow to shield the innocent. At times, the darkness of war seemed all-encompassing, the realm drowning in betrayals and cruelty. Yet the memory of his near-death and miraculous rescue guided him, reminding him that hope could be found even in the blackest night. Each day he rose again to counsel Robb, to lead men with integrity, to carry forward the banner of the direwolf. And at his side, Sansa walked, forging her own path of quiet resolve, no longer the frightened girl held captive by the Lannisters, but a survivor who had seen the ugliest face of war and endured. Together they lit a small flame of hope against the shadows, believing that somewhere Arya survived, that Bran and Rickon in the far north were waiting, and that the fortunes of House Stark would endure the storm that swept the Seven Kingdoms. Such was the new life of Eddard Stark, rescued from the executioner's block by the Brotherhood without banners, returned to stand beside his son and daughter in the forging flames of war. The night was dark and the path uncertain, but honor and love still guided him, and so long as he drew breath, he would not falter. For no matter how vicious the battles, no matter how treacherous the lords, Ned Stark remained true to the words that defined his house for generations: winter is coming. And he would ensure that when the cold winds rose, House Stark would stand together, unbroken and unbowed, until the snows melted and a new spring bloomed across the war-torn land.